The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., October 22nd, 2021. I hereby appoint the Honorable Lauren Underwood to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Will you pray with me? God, you have asked of us above all things to love our neighbor. Help us to live into that difficult yet simple commandment. The other half of that command is not easy either, that we are to love them as we love ourselves. Holy God, for a variety of reasons, loving ourselves is often difficult. Remind us that you first loved us. Your love has forgiven us all our faults, excused our shortcomings. May we bask in that redemption with gratitude for your mercy. Then, as we turn to our neighbors, those we find in our communities, in our country, in this chamber, enable us to understand that what we do to them should be a reflection of what you have so mercifully done for us. If in response to your willingness to love us, allowing us to discover our worth, our value, then we will be willing to love them, and our neighbors will be encouraged and strengthened, and our relationship with them transformed. God of love, we pray that this day we would remain faithful to your golden rule and live as examples of your merciful and gracious love. In your redemptive name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pursuant to Section 11A of House Resolution 188, the Journal of the last day's proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson. The chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Last week, Chicago and the nation lost a great champion for justice and civil rights, Dr. Timuel Black. As a World War II veteran and a leader in the Black community that came to Chicago during the Great Migration, Tim always challenged the inequities he witnessed in the United States and abroad. In his 102 years, Tim was a historian, educator, author, and civil rights activist. He inspired generations to fight for racial and social justice. He fought alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and helped organize the March on Washington. He registered voters and raised funds to elect Harold Washington, the first Black mayor of Chicago in 1983. He mentored the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama. On a personal note, I'll always be grateful for Tim's support during my mayoral campaign in 2015. He said he supported me as someone who was able to communicate with everyone and transcend racial lines. Tim profoundly shaped the struggle for civil rights in Chicago and across the country. I will seek to honor him by following his example and fighting for the voiceless in our city. Rest in power, Tim Black.
Purposes, the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition.
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today with a heavy heart to remember and honor Darien Police Officer David Horton of Ludowici, Georgia, who sadly passed away at the age of 45. David was a respected and honored member of his community. After graduating from law enforcement training in 2014, he began his career with the Long County Sheriff's Office. David had a heart for service and was awarded numerous accolades during his time in law enforcement. As an agency DUI Hero Award, David was the definition of protect and serve. He was not only a dedicated law enforcement officer, but also a devoted father and citizen who was loved and respected by many. I am thankful for David's lifetime of service and commitment to his community. I know his legacy will be forever treasured. My thoughts and prayers are with his family, friends, and all who knew him during this most difficult time. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker and members of the House, last month on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, former President George W. Bush delivered remarks commemorating the heroism of the crew and passengers of United Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. The former president's words were a welcome reminder, Madam Speaker, of what it looks like for an American leader to call us together in unity. His words were compassionate, inspiring, and patriotic. Now, Madam Speaker, he and I have had many differences over the years when it comes to policy. During his presidency, I opposed much of his governing agenda. And he did the same, opposing many of Democrats' plans when we came into the majority in 2007. But we respected one another, and we were able to work together with one another, and we both had at the center of our philosophy the best interest of the United States of America and its people. We always approached each other with civility, with seriousness, and with a shared respect for each other's patriotism. We never questioned each other's love of our country or that we were doing what we thought was best for the safety and security of the American people. I hope that President Bush's message will inspire my friends on the other side of the aisle, and indeed all Americans and all of us, from the former president's own party, to remember what the kind of leadership looks like after 4 years of a president who did not call us to unity, who did not encourage civility or common cause, and who furthered our divides instead of bridged them. I hope as well that we in this House can strive to heal the divisions in our country and embrace the kind of leadership that President Bush displayed last month, and that together, as Democrats and Republicans, we can work toward a better tomorrow for all of our fellow Americans. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that President Bush's full remarks be inserted into the record at this time.
Without objection.
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
To ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, America is experiencing an energy crisis. The price of oil, a gallon of gas, electricity, and natural gas are all topping 7-year highs. But what does that really mean for the American people? It means less money to buy groceries and more money at the gas pump. It means less money to take care of your kids and more money to heat your home. And it means less money for your health care and more money for overhead to run your business. That's a terrible trade-off for every American working hard to support their families. And it's only happening because the Biden administration is intent on implementing policies that make it harder for American energy producers to develop cleaner, more affordable energy right here at home. President Biden must wake up and see that there is only one way to reverse this course. Embrace American energy. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the history and the legacy of the Oberlin community. Founded in 1866, Oberlin Village is one of the last surviving antebellum settlements founded by free Black people in North Carolina. After Reconstruction, the community became a welcoming refuge for newly freed former slaves from the nearby Cameron Plantation. It became much more than a town. The thriving municipality was home to rows of single-family houses, 2 churches, and a public school, and it became a symbol of land ownership for freedmen. The local post office, now located in a building owned by the Oberlin Baptist Church, is still named after the plantation, rather than this historic community. I urge the Postal Service to change the name to reflect the post office's new location and to commemorate the Oberlin Village community and its legacy. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tim Murtaugh, a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, correctly wrote, quote, President Joe Biden is drowning in a sea of crises of his own creation, and Americans are the ones who are paying the price. There's an ongoing humanitarian and national security calamity at the southern border. 13 U.S. service members are dead, and an unknown number of our citizens remain stranded in Afghanistan following Biden's disastrous withdrawal. Americans are not taking the millions of jobs available, as many have chosen the option of being paid by the government to stay home instead of working. And energy prices continue to rise, helping to drive mounting inflation. Such a callous dismissal of real-world issues simply feeds the prevailing belief that Biden simply is bad for the job, end of quote. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as the global war on terrorism continues moving from Afghanistan to America. Our thoughts and prayers are with South Carolina Senate Finance Chairman Hugh Leatherman for a speedy recovery. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to address the House for 1 minute, please.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to call attention to the significant mail backlogs we are experiencing in northern Ohio across the whole region, Cleveland to Toledo, impacting the timely and reliable delivery of mail. Postal employees do remarkable work every day to execute their mission, and the tens of thousands of military veterans who work for the Postal Service, we owe you an enormous debt of gratitude for your continued loyal service to our nation. However, the decisions by the U.S. Postal Service Board of Directors and Management to implement disastrous policies to consolidate processing centers and ship local mail hundreds of miles away to be sorted elsewhere is truly illogical. While we are finally seeing incremental progress being made, our region is still in desperate need for constructive solutions to the backups and slow processing people are enduring on the ground. I'll continue working with my colleagues from across our country and across the aisle until we bring about new Postal Service leadership and fully restore the service our people and communities richly deserve and expect. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I'd like to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Last night on television, I listened as Jen Psaki, I don't know whether it was yesterday or replay for something a month ago, wondered why President Biden should go to the border. Having been down there, I want to educate her as to why. First of all, she'd find out we got a shortage of Border Patrol. Well, over 10,000 unaccompanied minors a month are coming across the border, and they have to deal with them. Because they have to deal with them, they are not able to guard the border. Rather than giving free college for illegals, you could get some more Border Patrol agents. Secondly, he'd get to know that Border Patrol agents are wonderful people, so that in the future, when agents on horses charge in a group of Haitians who are assaulting some woman, our hate-filled president does not attack the Border Patrol. Third, she can find out that immigrants are right now routinely throwing away identification cards so that we can't do background checks on the immigrants. Fourth, she'd find out that immigrants right now, I always knew that immigrants who tested positive for the COVID are being let in. I was not aware the Border Patrol has a policy that we can never even force immigrants to take the checks.
Expired.
Thank you.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for yielding, Madam Speaker. I rise today to remember the life of Moreno Valley City Councilwoman and true public servant Victoria Baca. As the first Latina elected to the City Council, Victoria broke barriers and paved the way for so many others to follow in her footsteps. I knew Victoria during her time on the City Council and remember her as someone who was fiercely loyal to her community. Victoria also served on the board of the Moreno Valley Unified School District, where she was a strong advocate for special education services in the Inland Empire and dedicated her time in office to protecting and uplifting students. She genuinely cared about others and worked tirelessly to make a lasting difference. Her legacy with respect to education, diversity, and economic growth in Moreno Valley will always be admired. Victoria's death has left a void in the community and in the lives of the people closest to her. I'm honored to have known her and to have witnessed the positive change she pioneered. To the Baca family and all those who knew, loved, and respected her, I offer my deepest condolences. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It appears that the Biden administration is going to do everything it can possibly to destroy our economy and hurt working class people. Headline in today's Washington Times, Biden piles up red tape after Trump trims. Long arm of regulation reaches businesses for vague objectives. And I quote, President Biden accelerated the regulatory state on his first day in office by ordering agencies to consider aspirational but vaguely defined goals and benefits when imposing new rules on businesses large and small. The order greenlighting regulations even when the benefits are, quote, difficult or impossible to quantify, shudders down the spines of CEOs. They fear business growth will be smothered in pursuit of vague objectives such as, quote, human dignity and the interest of future generations. It's the most aggressive thing I've ever seen by the administration, said Doug Holtz-Eakin. It's one thing to put out a bunch of regulations, but this changes the way regulations is done. It allows you to jam through any regulation you want, regardless of the impact on the private sector. We know we are having historic increased inflation, historic debt
The gentlewoman's
levels.
time is
now,
expired.
Regulations. It's a disaster coming. I yield back.
You ready? Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 716, I call up the bill H.R. 3110 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 75, H.R. 3110, a bill to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 to expand access to breastfeeding accommodations in the workplace and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 716, an amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Education and Labor, printed in the bill, modified by the amendment printed in Part C of House Report 117-137, is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended is debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Labor or their respective designees. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.R. 3110, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Today, the House has an opportunity to pass H.R. 3110, the Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers Act, or the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, a bipartisan bill that will strengthen workplace protections for nursing mothers. Nursing mothers will have a clear right to break time and a clean, private space to pump breast milk at work. As we've heard from health experts and worker advocates across the country, these basic accommodations ensure that nursing mothers can balance their work, their health, and the health of their babies. Regrettably, many nursing mothers still do not have these protections. Under current law, millions of workers, including farm workers, transportation workers, and teachers, are currently excluded from federal protections for nursing employees. The nursing mothers who are covered by existing law have limited recourse when their rights are violated. To close these gaps, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act expands existing protections for nursing mothers for nearly 9 million employees who are currently left out. It provides nursing workers with access to meaningful remedies when employers fail to provide appropriate time and pumping space. Importantly, this bill includes an amendment to clarify that congressional employees are covered by these protections and to address safety concerns by including airline crew members' break time to pump during a flight. No working American should be forced to choose between going to work and staying healthy, so we must take this urgent step to support nursing workers and strengthen our economy. The Biden administration has issued a statement of administration policy in support of this bill, and I ask unanimous consent that the statement of administration policy for H.R. 3110 be admitted into the record.
Without objection.
I urge support of the legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 3110. This act puts overly burdensome one-size-fits-all requirements on businesses. While I believe empowering women in the workplace is important, we must not saddle businesses with rigid policies that will open them up to legal action. We instead must support flexible policies that allow women to thrive in the workplace. This bill's flawed scheme and expansive mandate do more harm than good and will further bog down businesses that are already struggling to recover from the pandemic. During this difficult time, the last thing small businesses need are more sweeping mandates. More than 2 million women left the labor force in 2020. Now more than ever, we need to advocate for flexible workplace policies that improve conditions for and empower working mothers. I fully support women who wish to enter and return to the workforce, and I understand the challenges that can come with this, especially for nursing mothers. Yet I don't believe one-size-fits-all mandates are beneficial, not for women and not for employers. Workplaces are as varied as the people they employ. Putting every workplace under the same standard, despite a job creator's needs or ability to meet that standard, will ultimately be bad for the American worker. Airlines are just one example of an industry that will be negatively impacted if this bill is signed into law. Under this bill's rigid requirements, airlines may have to rethink plane designs or modify aircraft to provide a private space, other than a bathroom, for nursing mothers to pump as required under the bill. The rigid break requirements in the bill are also inappropriate for airlines because flight crews have varying responsibilities in preparation for and throughout flights, which ensure the safety and security of passengers. Exposing airlines and other businesses to such inflexible requirements will hurt struggling businesses. Further, not all nursing mothers have the same needs. Pretending that they do might be convenient, but it also demonstrates ignorance about the diverse circumstances that mothers are in. I wholeheartedly believe that it is possible to provide women with a healthy environment in which to work and simultaneously to allow businesses flexibility in providing accommodations. When I first entered the workforce, nursing accommodation requirements for women in the workplace were not even on the horizon. Countless workplaces now provide such accommodations, and rightly so. Current law provides accommodations for hourly workers. Creating a healthy place for women to thrive is important to us all. But there's a right way to go about this and a wrong way. H.R. 3110 is the wrong way. Most employers have their employees' best interest at heart, but H.R. 3110 treats our job creators as if they're out to harm the very women they depend on to keep their businesses running. Again, this is the wrong way to go about empowering women in the workplace. This bill's excessive penalties, expansive mandate, and lack of clarity will create a perfect storm for frivolous lawsuits. Unfounded lawsuits cost businesses billions every year in the United States. We should do all we can to prevent opening businesses up to harmful legal action. I'd like to remind my colleagues that Representative Miller Meeks submitted her bill, the Supporting Working Mothers Act, to the Rules Committee as an amendment to provide a common sense alternative to the Pump Act. That is a sensible amendment that meets the actual needs of nursing mothers without forcing overly burdensome regulations on our job creators. This amendment, unlike the Pump Act, expands access to nursing accommodations in the workplace without relying on punitive mandates that expose business owners to costly litigation. The Supporting Working Mothers Act adds nursing accommodation coverage for white-collar executive, administrative, or professional employees, ensuring that over 80% of currently exempt women are covered. That amendment also includes a fair and workable process to ensure accommodations are provided for nursing mothers by encouraging collaboration between workers and employers to identify and make improvements when accommodations are insufficient. Representative Miller Meeks' common sense amendment serves nursing mothers in the workforce without sacrificing the well-being of our job creators. This is the right way to empower women. I'm extremely disappointed that the Democrat majority refused to make the amendments in order. Democrats chose to stifle debate on this common sense approach by nursing accommodations in favor of a flawed mandate. Because the bill is impractical and overly punitive, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 3110. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, Chair of the Oversight and Reform Committee and the lead Democratic sponsor of the bill, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his incredible leadership in this body. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3110, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, a bipartisan bill I authored with Representative Herrera Beutler. Our bill has also been introduced in the Senate by Senator Merkley and Murkowski. When I first came to Congress, working mothers would come to me, often in tears, and advocate for a place to safely pump breast milk. Often they were fired, ridiculed, forbidden, or forced to pump milk in bathrooms. Since those years, I have worked for on-site lactation rooms here in government and really everywhere in our country. In 1998, I passed a provision allowing state WIC agencies to purchase breast pumps for new mothers, making it easier for low-income moms to choose breastfeeding. In 1999, Congress passed my bill to guarantee the right to breastfeed on federal property. And most recently, Senator Merkley and I passed the break time for nursing mothers as part of the Affordable Care Act. This act provides employees with critical protections to provide break time for nursing mothers in a private place to pump milk. The Pump for Nursing Mothers Act we're considering today builds on the Break Time Act by protecting the nearly 9 million employees who were not originally included in these protections. Those covered by the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act now include teachers, nurses, farm workers, software engineers, to name a few. The Pump for Nursing Mothers Act would also ensure that nursing mothers have remedies if their employers fire them or violate these breastfeeding protections. In addition, if an employee is fired for taking a break, the Pump Act ensures that workers can seek reinstatement. It also extends breastfeeding protections for 2 years, in line with recommendations from the World Health Organization. Over 150 organizations have submitted letters in support of this important legislation. I ask unanimous consent to place them in the record. From the Center for Work Life, the U.S. Breastfeeding Committee, Moms Rising, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, to name a few.
Without objection.
As these organizations have demonstrated, without these protections, nursing mothers face serious health consequences, including the risk of painful illness and the inability to continue to breastfeed. Studies have shown that health benefits for infants and children are really important from breastfeeding and prevent other diseases. These basic protections would ensure that working moms who want to breastfeed can continue to do so and prevent nursing mothers from being singled out, ridiculed, or fired. It is an important step, this bill, for work-family balance. We say we support families. Today is a vote for
The gentlewoman's
families,
time's expired.
work-family balance, and mothers and infants. I urge a strong yes vote, a bipartisan vote, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks.
The gentlewoman from Iowa is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank Dr. Fox for yielding me time to speak on this important issue. As a mother and a physician, I understand the tremendous value that nursing an infant brings both to the mother and the child. As the director of the Iowa Department of Public Health, I attended conferences and spoke on the need to encourage mothers to consider breastfeeding and the benefits of breastfeeding, be they nutritional, immunological, or the tremendous bond that occurs through breastfeeding. It is also why, despite being a working mother who is doing a general surgery internship and ophthalmology residency, I breastfed both of my children. And because I was a working mother, that included expressing breast milk by pumping. And I understand and I am supportive of the collaboration between employers and nursing mothers to have a private place to do so at their place of employment. I recognize that H.R. 3110 is trying to address this issue and provide accommodations for nursing mothers, which I wholeheartedly support. However, I feel the bill needs improvement. As it stands, H.R. 3110 puts a one-size-fits-all treatment of nursing accommodations for different businesses and industries. The bill also puts excessive penalties for minor or technical violations of the nursing accommodation requirements in the Fair Labor Standards Act. These unreasonable penalties, combined with compliance challenges posed by the mandate, will lead to costly and protracted lawsuits because of their adversarial nature. The result will be delayed accommodations for working mothers. Rather than a collaborative arrangement between an employer and a nursing mother employee, this bill is punitive in nature. To address the flaws in H.R. 3110 and build on current law protections for nursing mothers, I submitted my bill, H.R. 4297, the Supporting Working Mothers Act, to the Rules Committee as an amendment. My bill is based on legislation introduced in a previous Congress by the sponsor of the bill we are debating today. Unfortunately, the majority refused to allow my amendment to even be debated on the floor. My amendment represents a workable, feasible, and reasonable approach to the Fair Labor Standards Act nursing accommodation requirements. First, my amendment would have modified current law by providing coverage to white-collar executive, administrative, and professional employees, while also maintaining current law coverage of hourly employees. My bill also preserved the 50-employee undue hardship exemption threshold as a safeguard for small businesses. These provisions would ensure coverage for over 80% of the women who are not currently covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act nursing accommodation requirement. The bill we are debating today, H.R. 3110, significantly increases the penalties for employer violations that are required for breastfeeding accommodations, regardless of attempts at compliance. These penalties are disproportionate to the technical and unintentional Fair Labor Standards Act violations which could occur under this bill. My amendment would have preserved the authority of the Secretary of Labor to provide injunctive relief to address shortcomings and accommodations and accessible monetary penalties for repeat violations. However, and this is critical, my amendment also includes a provision establishing a collaborative process for employees and employers to create and improve accommodations in a timely fashion without relying on time-consuming and expensive lawsuits. Because workplaces are not one-size-fits-all, it is critical that legislation on nursing accommodations provide clear requirements that are adaptable to many kinds of workplaces so that employers understand their obligations and are able to comply. Again, given my strong support of breastfeeding, pumping, and storing of breast milk, I'm very disappointed that my amendment was not ruled in order by the majority and that Congress did not take this opportunity to address the flaws in H.R. 3110. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Washington State, the co-chair of the Maternity Chair Caucus and the lead Republican sponsor on the bill, Ms. Herrera Beutler.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today in support of our bipartisan bill, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act. And honestly, this legislation, the whole goal is just to protect a nursing mother's ability to provide for her infant by pumping at work. And let me be clear, this is a business-friendly bill. This is current law. For those who are thinking we're shaking the earth and doing something brand new, it actually is current law. There were problems with the way the current law was written. It was actually put in the wrong place in code, and we're fixing that. So the way it is currently, you could be a mom who gets into working and you've worked your way up into a career where you're salaried and you make a decent amount of money, but you were excluded from this legislation. You didn't have the right to expect this, even though other workers did. We're simply making some of those changes to make sure that folks who were not eligible for overtime, like that working mom, would be covered under current law. And this bill gives clarity for businesses and predictability, and it allows small businesses to claim undue hardship exemptions in recognition of the unique challenges that they face. Look, making sure our economy works is a huge priority to me. But we have to also recognize that working moms make up a significant portion and should of the workforce, and it's going to grow. I thank my colleagues for improving this bill, and it reflects its original intent with regard to businesses, namely differentiating between large employers and mom and pop operations. Look, as a mom of 3 young kids myself, I understand finding the balance of raising kids, going to work, and just simply finding a place to pump while working. My first was a 28-week preemie. It was imperative for her to have breast milk. We were told this by her doctors. She could not handle formula. And they said it is imperative that you do what you can to breastfeed her. And I joke, I'm gonna write a book, Oh, the Places I've Pumped. I mean, I've pumped in trains, on planes, in automobiles, in an officer's, some poor low-ranking officer's office at the Pentagon, at a kibbutz in Israel, on a Kodel. I mean, it's everywhere. And I can tell you that there are places that are clean and helpful, and it doesn't have to be like the Taj Mahal. You just need something that's not crammed over a public toilet while people are flushing over you. So honestly, on a really serious note, this is a critical piece of legislation that is going to empower women in the workforce to continue to provide for their families. Imagine a single mother and not having that choice. She has to work, and maybe she wants to provide breast milk for her child, or maybe she has to in a circumstance like mine. Making sure that mothers of infants and toddlers can continue to do this in the workforce and continue to join the workforce is absolutely vital. With women making up over half of our nation's workforce, it's crucial that moms aren't forced to choose between going to their job or breastfeeding their child. And with the U.S. Chambers of Commerce endorsement of this legislation, this bill seeks to help, not hinder, an employer's ability to provide a safe space for moms to pump. Now, I'm proud to help lead this bipartisan legislation with my colleague, Congresswoman Maloney, but so moms in Southwest Washington and across this country can feel secure. I ask unanimous. Thank you. I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters of support from the United States Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Federation. And with that, I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this bill, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Okay. The gentleman from Virginia reserves his time. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you to my distinguished ranking member from North Carolina. Person Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, or should I call it the Pump for Nursing Persons Act? I can't keep up with the rules of this House. At a time, Person Speaker, when we have 10 million job openings, why does the Democrat majority have such contempt and disdain for struggling businesses, job creators, and employers? With businesses already suffering from endless regulations and the resulting costs passed on to consumers, not to mention being saddled with vaccine mandates, endless COVID restrictions, why are Democrats relentlessly consumed with making things worse? The fact is, Democrats are economically illiterate. They don't understand that the government doesn't have any money, they can only take it from taxpayers, and businesses don't truly pay taxes or pay for regulations. They have 2 choices: close or pass on those costs to consumers. Democrats believe that employers are abusing and exploiting their workers, and Democrats are working every day to punish them, with the result being more lost jobs, greater supply shortages, and higher inflation, as we see around our country today. We all believe in an equal workplace for men and women, but I oppose legislation that falsely victimizes employees and is truly just another payout for trial lawyers, otherwise known as Democrat donors. They are seeking just to exploit these excessive new penalties on businesses. The fact is, employers want happy and productive employees. They're working hard to attract and retain those workers, and they're already making these accommodations without the heavy hand of the federal government. I encourage my colleagues across the aisle to visit a business or talk to an employer. This regulation was written by trial lawyers, and I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I will be doing the same, and I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Virginia is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, co-chair of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, Ms. Underwood.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Every mom returning to the workforce after childbirth should be provided the time and space that they need to safely and privately pump breast milk at work. As a nurse, I understand how critical breastfeeding is to the health of both mom and baby. Without sufficient workplace protections, breastfeeding employees are at risk of serious and painful health consequences and reduced milk supply. They can also face harassment, docked pay, and even job loss. Yet each year, millions of workers, including teachers, nurses, farm workers, and salaried employees, are denied this basic protection due to an unintended loophole in current law. I am so grateful for Chairwoman Maloney for her leadership and proud to join her in leading the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act to close the coverage gap and ensure all breastfeeding moms are protected and supported as they return to work. This bill is bipartisan and has a broad coalition of support from public health, labor, and civil rights groups, as well as from the business community. It's also urgently needed, providing common sense, necessary protections for working moms, as well as more clarity and predictability for employers. Returning to work after childbirth already poses many inherent challenges for moms and their families, and we must remove barriers for parents making the best choices for their families and themselves. I urge my colleagues to join me and vote yes on this important legislation. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 3 letters in support of the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act from the National Education Association, the National Partnership for Women and Families, and the March of Dimes.
Without objection.
I'd like to thank these groups for their support of the bill and for their tireless efforts on behalf of working moms. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Illinois, Representative Mary Miller.
Thank you,
The
Madam
gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 3110, the Pump Act. Americans want nursing mothers to have adequate provisions in the workplace. The fact is, they are already provided in the Fair Labor Standards Act. The bill before us consists of unreasonable burdens on employers and penalties that will end up disincentivizing job creation. At the same time that nursing mothers deserve protections, employers deserve allowances for flexibility in their workplace. We are in the midst of an economic, supply chain, and employment crisis. We don't need to put more hurdles in the way of businesses and employment. When I am in my district and I speak to business owners all around my district, the number one thing I hear is, we cannot find enough workers. Why are we going to put more strain on them? Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlelady from California, the co-chair of the Maternity Care Caucus, Ms. Robel Allard.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the Pump Act to expand workplace protections for breastfeeding moms and ensure they have access to appropriate and necessary accommodations. Decades of research have shown that breastfeeding is one of the most cost-effective interventions for improving maternal and child health. Compared with formula-fed children, breastfed babies have a reduced risk of ear, skin, stomach, and respiratory infections, sudden infant death syndrome, obesity, type 1 and 2 diabetes, asthma, and childhood leukemia. However, while 84% of U.S. babies are breastfed at birth, only 25% are still exclusively breastfed at 6 months of age. I commend my colleague, Carolyn Maloney, for her career-long dedication to improving these breastfeeding statistics. Congresswoman Maloney's 2010 Break Time for Nursing Mothers law provided the first critical protections to ensure mothers would have reasonable break times and a private place to pump breast milk. Mothers with this access to workplace support have lower health care costs, absenteeism, and turnover, and show improved job morale, satisfaction, and productivity. However, that law unintentionally excluded 9 million women from these workplace protections, including teachers, software engineers, and many nurses. Expanding workplace protections to include these women is important because research clearly shows that without protections, breastfeeding employees have increased risk of painful illness and infection, diminished milk supply, and are more likely to stop breastfeeding early. As co-chair of both the Maternity Care Caucus and the Public Health Caucus, I am proud to be an original co-sponsor of the PUMP Act, which is a common-sense solution to eliminating workplace barriers that interfere with successful breastfeeding. The Pump for Nursing Mothers Act is critical to ensuring all mothers have the opportunity to reach their personal breastfeeding goals to protect their babies. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I ask unanimous consent to place into the record letters of support from La Leche League, the Academy of Nutrition, and A Better Balance.
Without objection.
Okay, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, H.R. 3110 leaves a whole host of unanswered questions for employers regarding their obligations under the bill as written. H.R. 3110 threatens job creators with disproportionate penalties for technical or unintentional violations of the FLSA's accommodation requirements. For example, are employers required to build a separate room to provide these accommodations? H.R. 3110 fails to answer this question or the circumstances and specifications an employer would need to know to comply with such a requirement or how such requirements would interact with other federal laws. For instance, the bill does not clarify whether the space must be compliant with Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, accessibility requirements, or how it will fit in with ADA requirements such as clear path of travel. Nor does the legislation give appropriate guidance as to whether the space must be permanent or temporary. In addition, the remedies in H.R. 3110 go far beyond what is recoverable with respect to other proven wage and hour and break violations under both federal law and state laws. The expansion of remedies in the bill will increase litigation and result in a financial windfall for trial lawyers. But these penalties do not address the employee's main interest in obtaining appropriate break time and space. Expanded monetary damages will undoubtedly lead to more litigation and the additional delays that litigation brings in already overburdened courts. It also should be noted that the Department of Labor is better suited to enforce technical violations of the FLSA quickly and effectively. Litigation is no solution. DOL has institutional knowledge of federal labor laws, including the FLSA, and is equipped to provide accurate guidance to employers. To understand the implication of H.R. 3110, one only needs to look at the proliferation of lawsuits for gotcha technical violations throughout various federal and state wage and hour laws or the ADA to recognize that costly litigation will follow and positive results for employees will be delayed. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes from the gentlelady from Oregon, the chair of the Civil Rights and Human Services Subcommittee of the Ed and Labor Committee, Ms. Bonamici.
The gentlewoman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of the bipartisan Pump for Nursing Mothers Act. Since 2010, the Affordable Care Act has required employers to provide nursing mothers with break time to express milk, as well as access to a private non-bathroom space for pumping. Although this was a significant improvement for working moms, one that I didn't have when I was breastfeeding my babies, the law still left 9 million workers uncovered, including teachers, agricultural workers, engineers, and others. This coverage gap is unacceptable, and it means that each year millions of parents who choose to breastfeed must decide between the health of their child and maintaining employment. The coverage gap has also disproportionately harmed Black and brown women, who represent 12% of the workforce, but nearly 20% of women of childbearing age who are not covered by the existing break time provision. The Pump for Nursing Mothers Act will address this coverage gap by simply amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to provide protections to workers who are not currently covered. As Representative Herrera Butler explained, this is current law. We're just closing a gap that is leaving too many nursing moms out. It would also clarify that if a worker is not relieved of their duties during the time spent pumping, then those hours must count as hours worked. Colleagues, I urge all of you to support the rights of women in the workplace and to help their families by joining me in voting for the Bipartisan Pump Act. And Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter in support of the bill from the United States Breastfeeding Committee.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman for Virginia reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'll reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Virginia is recognized. North Carolina is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Supporters of H.R. 3110 claim the bill merely fills unintended gaps in the nursing accommodation requirements signed into law in 2010, but this description is not accurate. H.R. 3110 imposes a flawed scheme full of unreasonably expansive mandates, including overly broad coverage coupled with gratuitous and disproportionate penalties. The bill expands the Fair Labor Standard Act's coverage of break time for nursing mothers to all 143 million employees covered by the Act. As a result, H.R. 3110 will require one-size-fits-all nursing accommodations and impose substantial compliance burdens on a wide variety of workplaces and industries. Admitting this problem in the underlying bill, the manager's amendment attempts to mitigate the bill's requirements so that they are compatible with ensuring safety and security for airline passengers and flight crews. H.R. 3110 requires that airline employees have access to an enclosed area for pumping breast milk, even though aircraft designs are regulated by the FAA for safety, security, and reliability, with limited ability to add additional enclosed space. Remote and rural airports also face unique challenges because of the smaller planes in use at those airports. It is even more challenging to provide a private space in a commercial aircraft other than a bathroom, as mandated by H.R. 3110. Additionally, many of these planes have small flight crews with few redundancies and duties. Under the bill, they would be hard-pressed to maintain appropriate staffing levels and access to services. Exposing businesses to inflexible and unworkable requirements, coupled with increased penalties for alleged violations, will clearly create new incentives for trial lawyers. H.R. 3110 will only encourage trial lawyers to file more lawsuits of questionable validity targeting unsuspecting business owners. Supporters of H.R. 3110 say the bill is about providing women with better accommodations in the workplace. But the truth is the bill fails to live up to that promise. With that, I reserve, Madam Speaker.
Is she reserving? Does the gentleman yield back? Ms. Fox?
I'm sorry, I thought I said reserve.
Do you yield back your time?
No, ma'am, I said reserve.
Okay. The
I'm
gentlelady
sorry.
reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to close, and I believe we have the right to close.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, consideration of H.R. 3110 marks the latest in a series of affronts to small businesses perpetuated by House Democrats throughout the 117th Congress. Last month, Democrat members of the Education and Labor Committee voted to increase drastically the penalties on employers, including a 512% increase in Occupational Safety and Health Act penalties and a whopping 900% increase in Fair Labor Standards Act penalties on job creators, including small businesses. Democrats also voted to authorize the National Labor Relations Board to levy $50,000 and $100,000 fines on small business owners for business activities that are currently lawful. Republican members offered several amendments at the committee's reconciliation markup to exempt small businesses from the devastating impacts of those provisions. However, these common sense amendments were voted down by committee Democrats on party line votes. The bill we're debating today was reported out of committee with disturbing implications for smaller employers. Currently under the FLSA, businesses with fewer than 50 employees may demonstrate that the FLSA's nursing accommodation requirements would impose an undue hardship. The FLSA's unique hardship provision is an affirmative defense to claims that small businesses must demonstrate in court. Committee Democrats chose to cut the undue hardship exemption in half to fewer than 25 employees. While this Democrat affront to small business was corrected in the manager's amendment, more changes are necessary to protect small businesses fully. H.R. 3110 imposes excessive penalties for minor or technical violations of the FLSA's nursing accommodation requirement while failing to anticipate workplace realities in providing accommodations. These excessive penalties, combined with the high probability of minor or unintended infractions related to compliance with a complex mandate on hundreds of thousands of new businesses, will lead to a proliferation of expensive and protracted lawsuits, resulting in delayed accommodations for workers. In contrast to the shortcomings of H.R. 3110, Dr. Miller Meeks submitted a responsible substitute amendment for consideration, which implements common sense and workable alterations to the FLSA's nursing accommodation requirements. The Miller Meeks amendment adds nursing accommodation coverage for white-collar executive, administrative, or professional employees while preserving the FLSA treatment of unique and disparate workplaces. Her amendment also preserves the Secretary of Labor's FLSA enforcement authority to address shortcomings in workplace accommodations through injunctive relief or levy civil monetary penalties against repeat and willful violators. Dr. Miller Meeks' amendment would not only ensure that the needs of small businesses are protected, but would also update FLSA nursing accommodation requirements in a way that meets the needs of both mothers and employers. It is disappointing and unfortunate that the Democrat leadership prevented the Miller Meeks amendment from being considered today. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I am prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. If we adopt the motion to recommit, we will instruct the Committee on Education and Labor to consider an amendment to exempt certain industries with unique workplace environments from the requirements in the underlying bill. I will ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record immediately prior to the vote on the motion to recommit.
Without objection. Without objection.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. H.R. 3110 imposes one-size-fits-all nursing recommendation requirements on different kinds of work environments, including those found in the airline, shipping, and agriculture industries. As a mother of two who nursed both children while working, I understand the importance of having these accommodations in the workplace. Under current law, the Fair Labor Standards Act provides hourly employees with access to accommodations while providing for certain industry and job-specific exemptions. This approach includes special protections to include the smallest of farms, which are not proportionally impacted by regulatory mandates, such as the one we are debating today. The mandate in H.R. 3110 would impose the same requirements on all 143 million employees covered under the FLSA. This would impose substantial compliance challenges and introduce safety concerns based on the nature of business operations in certain settings. For example, this would fail to account for the unique working conditions found in the aviation industry. H.R. 3110 requires that airline employees who are currently exempt from FLSA breastfeeding accommodation requirements have access to a space for pumping breast milk. This is despite the fact that aircraft designs are regulated by the FAA for safety and reliability purposes with limited ability to add additional private spaces. Modification of aircraft space would be prohibitively expensive and require the removal of airline seats. This requirement is even more challenging for smaller planes with fewer passenger seats that service regional airports. Additionally, pilot and flight attendant duties are heavily regulated by the FAA, with few redundancies in duties among staff, complicating the ability of aviation businesses to maintain appropriate staffing levels and access to services when faced with inflexible government-mandated breaks. Democrats acknowledge this problem in their manager's amendment to H.R. 3110, but failed to mitigate the negative impacts the bill would have on critical passenger safety and security functions, both on the ground and during flight. Because workplaces are not one size fits all, it's critical that any legislation in this area preserves flexibility for airline, shipping, and small farm employees to work, with their employees to be able to develop best practices in meeting individual workplace needs. Sweeping and overly prescriptive requirements that do not adequately address both the workplace environment and workforce needs will not lead to the best results for working mothers. Nursing mother accommodations should be encouraged, and the ongoing efforts of business owners to ensure access for their workers are to be applauded and supported. I'm offering this motion to recommit to ensure certain businesses have the flexibility to be able to develop nursing accommodations that meet the needs of their employees while accounting for unique working environments. I urge the adoption of this motion to recommit, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve again.
The gentleman reserves.
Speaker, I understand the gentleman's prepared to close, and so am I.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, H.R. 3110 is not the right way to empower women in the workplace. I support expanding flexible nursing accommodations in the workplace for women, but not in such a way that will unnecessarily increase liability for employers without helping nursing mothers. Furthermore, this bill levels excessive penalties for minor technical violations, opening our job creators to expensive and spurious lawsuits. Dr. Miller Meeks' Supporting Working Mothers amendment is a responsible alternative. It expands nursing accommodation coverage to a variety of workplaces, but also maintains exceptions for unique workplaces. That is the kind of flexible pro-woman and pro-jobs solution we need. We've had enough of Democrats' one-size-fits-all approach and overly broad mandates that hurt the very job creators we're relying on to help our economy recover from this pandemic. It is very disappointing that the majority denied debate on a practical alternative that will meet the needs of working mothers. Once again, I encourage my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 3110. This bill will do much more harm than good. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters in support of the bill from the ACLU and the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA.
Without objection.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it has now been more than a decade since Congress passed critical protections to guarantee nursing workers break time and private space to express breast milk at work. As we've heard today from members on both sides of the aisle, these protections are essential to protecting the health of nursing workers and their families. Yet nursing workers are continuing to suffer from gaps and weaknesses in the federal law. The need to address these gaps is even greater today as our economy recovers from COVID-19. Millions of workers, particularly working mothers, are looking to re-enter the workforce after being forced out of their jobs during the pandemic. The Pump for Nursing Mothers Act would provide workers with the peace of mind that they will not have to choose between returning to work and protecting themselves and their babies. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity to deliver on our promise to help all workers recover from the pandemic, stay safe, and succeed in their careers. This legislation will strengthen existing law, improve the lives of nursing workers across the country, and help our economy get back on its feet. And we know this program works because the provisions in this bill are already law on the federal level and in several states. Without the kinds of problems that have been suggested that might happen, those have not occurred under present law. And without any explosion of lawsuits. These provisions are already law, and there have not been those lawsuits. And the substitute offered by the minority does not expand as many to as many mothers as this bill does, and it would actually roll back some protections they already have. So I want to thank the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Herrera-Butler, for their leadership in this bipartisan legislation. And I urge my colleagues to support the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. All time for debate has expired. Each further amendment printed in Part D of House Report 117-137 shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, may be withdrawn by the proponent at any time before the question is put thereon, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in Part D of House Report 117-137. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part D of House Report number 117-137, offered by Ms. Ross of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 716, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to urge support for my amendment. My amendment to the Pump Act will help ensure women have sufficient notice of the new protections afforded to them in this bill. By ensuring that eligible people are provided with sufficient informational resources, more women will be able to exercise their rights, and the likelihood of employer defection will be reduced. In many places in this country, including my home state of North Carolina, it's easier to take a smoke break than for a mother to take a pump break. This is simply unacceptable. By passing the Pump Act, We can end this discrimination against breastfeeding workers and guarantee that no mother will have to choose between earning a living and feeding her child. But a law is only as effective as its enforcement. And we have unfortunately witnessed countless occasions where businesses have failed to inform workers of their rights. In just this last year, the Department of Labor investigated 6 businesses in North Carolina for violations of breastfeeding rights under the Fair Labor Standards Act. My amendment would provide the necessary information to ensure these workplace violations do not continue. We owe it to our nursing mothers, their families, and our local communities to be vigilant about overseeing the implementation of this law. This is a gender equality issue, a labor rights issue, an economic justice issue, and it demands our attention. I also seek unanimous consent to enter into the record letters from the director of La Leche and the National WIC Association.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, this amendment does nothing to address the shortcomings of H.R. 3110. We do not need a GAO report to know that employers will face numerous challenges in complying with the sweeping requirements imposed by H.R. 3110. The Fair Labor Standards Act ensures that hourly workers have access to time and space to pump breast milk, while exempting certain professions and industries with unique operating environments. Working mothers deserve proper accommodations to nurse in a clean and safe environment without fear of losing their job. But failing to account for differing workplaces, as H.R. 3110 does, is not the way to help women. The bill imposes one-size-fits-all treatment on a wide variety of businesses and industries without providing feasible compliance options. H.R. 3110 will also impose new and excessive penalties for minor or technical violations of the FLSA's nursing accommodation requirement. These unrealistic penalties, combined with compliance challenges resulting from the bill's mandate, will lead to a proliferation of costly and protracted lawsuits. The result will be delayed accommodations for workers. A report which acknowledges the complexities and liabilities inherent in H.R. 3110 and is released 2 years after the bill takes effect will do nothing to mitigate the bill's failures. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York, Representative Maloney.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise strongly in support of the amendment offered by Representative Deborah Ross of North Carolina, and I thank her for her leadership in North Carolina and here in Congress for working mothers, for infants, for families. We need more work-family balance. We need more support for working mothers. We now know with COVID that many families are not going back to work. They're reassessing their values. And when you have a child and you want to breastfeed and there's no accommodation, there really is no way you can go back to work. So this is pro-business and pro-worker and pro-family. Her amendment directs the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, to conduct a study on how employers are complying with the PUMP Act for nursing mothers. Even the best legislation must be monitored, and I am excited about the opportunity to ensure that employers are protecting the rights of nursing mothers. It's pro-family, and when you protect our families and our mothers and our children—
The gentlelady's time's expired.
I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The gentlelady from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
The gentlewoman
I have the right to close, Madam Speaker.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote in support of my amendment and the bill. Both are essential for our working mothers, for our families, and for the health of the next generation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we have a unique situation here this morning with two representatives from North Carolina who have totally different opinions of this bill and this amendment. And I urge my colleagues to vote no on the bill. We can do better. And I urge my colleagues to vote no on the amendment. It's a day late and $1 short. We should know what these things are in advance and not after the fact. It's what some of us might call a run-on amendment. We should have had the GAO study earlier to get a better feel for what this bill and would do to working mothers and to businesses in our country. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. Pursuant to House Resolution 176, the previous question is ordered on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross. The question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part D of House Report 117-137. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter on behalf of A Better Balance.
Lady, have an amendment.
I do.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
2, printed in Part D of House Report Number 117-137, offered by Ms. Strickland of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 716, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Strickland, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. There are several contributing factors to why nursing mothers may choose not to breastfeed and pump milk when returning to work. They include inflexible work schedules that make nursing and pumping breast milk regularly difficult, the lack of accommodations to pump and store milk, and concerns regarding support from supervisors and colleagues to pump milk. In addition to these factors, women of color and low-income women often experience the need to return to work shortly after giving birth, in most cases earlier than 12 weeks, and they face additional barriers such as racial discrimination and bias, whether intentional or not. This is why I'm proud to offer my amendment to H.R. 3110, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, the underlying bill that protects vulnerable workers by expanding access to breastfeeding accommodations in the workplace. This important piece of legislation advances our goals of equity in the workplace, and my amendment seeks to strengthen this bill by directing the GAO to conduct a study on the racial disparities that exist in access to pumping breast milk in the workplace. This amendment will also require that GAO submit a report to Congress on the results of this study with recommendations to address any disparities. Employers can begin to address these barriers by offering private lactation rooms or nursing rooms for both breastfeeding and pumping with proper cleaning and storage facilities, such as a table, sink, and small refrigerator, providing employees with adequate pump breaks, and allowing flexible work schedules and guaranteeing paid family leave. In fact, we can look to my home state of Washington as a prime example of how to lead on this issue. In 2019, the state legislature passed and signed into law House Bill 1930, which goes one step further than the current federal law by expanding pump break rights to include both salary and hourly employees, and requiring employers to provide a private space for pumping that isn't a bathroom, and allowing mothers to get pump breaks for up to 2 years after birth. Washington is also one of the very few states that provides people with up to 12 weeks of paid parental leave after the birth or adoption of a child. Yet despite current federal law, strong state-level protections such as the ones in Washington, and the gains that have been made in this area by employers in different sectors across our nation, racial disparities in the workplace still exist for women wishing to pump. My amendment aims to close this gap and equip Congress with the data it needs to create meaningful solutions. We must ensure that women and mothers everywhere and from all backgrounds have the support they deserve in the workplace. I urge my colleague to support this amendment and the underlying bill, the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, and I yield back the balance of my time to my colleague. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. H.R. 3110 imposes a sweeping one-size-fits-all mandate on businesses of all size that is unworkable and unreasonable. The bill treats all nursing mothers in workplaces as if they are the same, despite known differences in employees' needs, industry-specific challenges, and employers' abilities to meet the requirements. This amendment calls for a Government Accountability Office study on racial disparities with respect to access to workplace accommodations to pump breast milk, and for GAO to submit recommendations to Congress after the bill becomes law. Madam Speaker, let me be clear, crystal clear. I abhor any type of discrimination. There should be no place for discrimination in our country, in our employment, or anywhere. A study of this kind, however, should have been commissioned before the committee debated far-reaching legislation to impose a flawed mandate on all businesses in the United States. Instead, H.R. 3110 was rushed to a committee markup within 2 weeks of introduction. Democrats often put the cart before the horse, and this amendment does nothing to remedy the shortcomings of this legislation. Nursing women are not a monolith. They have unique needs that this legislation ignores. H.R. 3110 is reductive, and working women deserve better. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would like to ask for unanimous consent to enter a letter into the record from A Better Balance.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I would like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Congresswoman Maloney.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I thank the lady for yielding and for her leadership on this important bill, and I strongly support the amendment offered by Representative Strickland from Washington. It is sensitive, important, and strengthens the bill. It directs the Comptroller General to conduct a study on racial disparities and breastfeeding and submit recommendations to Congress that address these disparities. As a member of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, we are studying disparities in this caucus on health care and the challenges that some women face. Breastfeeding contains many health benefits for children and for their mothers and should be accessible to all women, no matter what their race. And we should study any disparity and try to strengthen access and availability. This is an excellent amendment. I support the lady for her work and sensitivity. I yield back to her to close.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment that benefits all of us, regardless of our political affiliation. This is a bipartisan bill. It deserves our support, as well as the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me reiterate again, I have no tolerance whatsoever for any type of discrimination in the workplace or any place else. However, if we are going to do a study about potential discrimination, it should be done before a bill is drafted and introduced and voted on. This amendment does not improve the very bad underlying bill, H.R. 3110. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the amendment and vote no on the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. Pursuant to House Resolution 716, the previous question is ordered on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Washington. The question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The previous question is ordered on the bill as amendment. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 to expand access to breastfeeding accommodations in the workplace and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Van Dyne of Texas moves to recommit the bill H.R. 3110 to the Committee on Education and Labor.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, may I please have a request to the yeas and nays?
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
Designated by Ms. Frankel, I inform the House.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Cooper, I inform the House that Mr. Cooper will vote no on the motion to recommit. As the member designated by Ms. Frankel, I inform the House that Ms. Frankel will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Russ Fulcher of Idaho, I inform the House that Mr.
From California seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Williams, I inform the House that Ms. Williams will vote no on the motion to recommit. And as the member designated by Mr. Jones, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will vote no on the motion to recommit. No on the motion to recommit.
Gentleman from California seek recognition.
No on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin, I inform the House Ms. Moore will vote no on the motion to recommit.
On the motion to recommit.
This vote, the yeas are 200, the nays 224. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No! Wait.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Okay, there you go. You go for it. Yeas and nays.
The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to...
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
member designated by Mr. Jones, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will vote yes on H.R. 3110.
For what purpose is the gentleman?
Term extension of the Surface Transportation Program.
Recognized.
Madam Speaker, also
What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of inquiring to the Majority Leader the schedule for next week.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
And Madam Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. With that, I would be happy to yield to my friend, the Majority Leader, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, on Monday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed, as usual, until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. And on Wednesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. For legislative business. The House will consider, Madam Speaker, several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today. With a short-term extension of the Surface Transportation Program through October 31st, the House will aim to consider the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Build Back Better Act this work period. In addition, the House will consider H.R. 2119, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Improvement Act of 2021, sponsored by Lucy McBath of Georgia. That bill modifies and expands and reauthorizes through fiscal year 26 the Family Violence and Prevention Services Program, which funds emergency shelters and supports related assistance for victims of domestic violence. If time allows, Madam Speaker, the House may also consider H.R. 3992, the Protecting Older Jobs Applicant Act, which allows applicants to bring disparate impact claim under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967 when they experience age discrimination while seeking a job. Lastly, additional legislative items may be possible when and if they are ready. And I thank my friend for yielding.
I thank the gentleman, and as we go through the bills that may come up next week, of course, we just finished a week bringing some bills to the floor, but as we look around the country, clearly the main concern we're hearing from families are all of the various crises that are facing American families. You've got an inflation crisis with goods of all kinds costing dramatically more when people go to buy things at the grocery store. If they try to get a new appliance, they're waiting longer, they're paying more money. You think about the energy crisis with families paying 50% more for gasoline in some cases, with dramatic increases at the pump and the pain that it causes, especially lower income families. The border crisis, where every day we see stories of thousands of people coming across our border illegally. The Attorney General was before the Judiciary Committee, and he couldn't even give a number of how many people have illegally crossed or a plan to address it. The supply chain crisis that we see getting worse and worse with ships backed up maybe almost all the way to China because that crisis is not being addressed. And so when you think about all these crises that families are angry about, it's hurting hardworking families, it's costing them, it's taking money out of their paychecks. There's not been a single bill brought to this floor last week. Doesn't sound like any being brought to the floor next week to address any of those crises. And I would ask the gentleman, would he be open to bringing actual legislation to the floor to address the various serious crises that families are facing today? And I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and question. Let me say that I mentioned two bills that will have a very, very substantial impact on the welfare of Americans, of families, of their health, and yes, even of their environmental security in the Build Back Better plan and the BIF plan, which is a bipartisan bill on the Senate side. I hope to bring both of those bills to the floor next week if they're ready. Unfortunately, we don't have help from your side on either of those bills, so it's more difficult to get unanimity on our side of the aisle. I will tell my friend, all those problems that you mentioned would be extraordinarily worse if we hadn't passed the American Rescue Plan in March of this year, which helped families extraordinarily generously to stay above water. Not a single person on your side of the aisle voted for those. So when the gentleman asked me, are we going to bring legislation to the floor, we brought it to the floor. You all opposed it, however, unfortunately, that helped families, helped child care, helped health care, helped health workers, helped states, all to meet the pandemic that this administration inherited. The pandemic was not the previous administration's fault, obviously, but the failure to deal with it effectively was their fault. So I tell you that 5 million jobs have been created since this administration took office. Some people lamented the 233,000 jobs that were last month, how awful that was. In the best year that Donald Trump had, that was his average production of jobs. In the best year he had, which was from January 18 to January 2019. So I will tell my friend, we hope to be able to bring these bills to the floor. We think they will have very substantial positive effect. We inherited, of course, because of the pandemic, again, not the fault of any, well, we don't know whether it was the fault of somebody purposely, but in any event, whatever reasons, extraordinary amounts of people were laid off around the world. And then, because of the rescue plan, we finally gave some people to get resources that they could buy things that they had needed and wanted for them and their families. And now we have a supply shortage. The President acted through executive order, as the gentleman knows, to make sure that we had a 24/7 operation at the ports, off Long Beach, off other ports in our country, to try to make sure that we, got goods on those ships that you say are to China. I don't know whether they're to China, but there are a lot of them. You're absolutely right on that. To get them offloaded, get them on trucks, and to get them to where they can be distributed and available, both for businesses, and then of course, we have a substantial shortage of chips, as the gentleman knows, which was caused by a lockdown in the major producers, Singapore being one, of chips. So we are dealing with that. The executive is dealing with that as well. But I very much hope the gentleman will help us get that legislation passed, which will make a major difference. Who says? 14 or 17 laureates who wrote to the White House and said if these bills pass, it's not only going to help jobs, it's not going to help climate, it's not only going to help health, but it's also going to help bring down inflation, which is a problem. Why do we have inflation? Because we have too many dollars chasing too few goods, and so prices go up. That's true of employment as well, which probably is good news in terms of salaries going up for people around the country. So I tell my friend that we do have some very substantial, important legislation that we are trying to get done. It would be a lot easier to get it done if we had help from your side of the aisle. And your answer will be, well, it'd be very helpful if you take some of our ideas. I get that. But I will tell you also, we have something, the gentleman's concerned about all those issues. If we don't protect the full faith and credit of the United States of America, they will all get disastrously worse. And not one of you is prepared in a debt that we all created, all of us. Not all on the same thing. It may have been cutting revenues, it may have been increasing spending, this, that, and the other. We all essentially voted for very substantial spending last year to meet the crisis of the pandemic. All of us did. The CARES Act, with the largest of those, $2 trillion, was unanimously passed. Voice vote in one instance. So the only thing I would say to the gentleman is we are very, very concerned about what's happening. We're very glad that we've created 5 million jobs. 9 million jobs were lost the year before that under Mr. Trump. He had a net loss of $2 million jobs, a net loss of 2 million jobs. We get talking about trillions, 2 million jobs over his 4 years, a net loss of 2 million jobs. This president has a net gain, we're going to try to continue that, and I hope we get some help from your side of the aisle, and I'll yield to my friend.
Thank the gentleman, and clearly we stand ready to help on all of those issues, but if Washington spending and borrowing money solved the problem, we would not have any of these crises because trillions of dollars have been borrowed and spent under this administration. In the previous administration, we worked together on those budget deals. Every one of them, the Paycheck Protection Program, the CARES Act, they were all very bipartisan, and it included addressing the debt that went along with it. There's been nothing bipartisan in any of the debt that's been racked up under this administration. And so if the gentleman's concerned about the full faith and credit of the United States, which we all are, then stop borrowing and spending trillions more dollars. But families get this, by the way. Families know if spending trillions was going to solve the problem, there wouldn't be a problem because trillions have been borrowed and spent just from January to October. What they know is it is the very borrowing and spending of trillions of dollars in Washington that has exacerbated these problems. The inflation crisis would not exist if you didn't have Washington borrowing and spending trillions more dollars, making it harder for people to get back into the workforce, making it harder for the supply chain to be addressed. You know, what was inherited? I think we know what was inherited by the Biden administration. We had energy dominance the day President Biden took the oath of office. Not only were we producing enough energy for our needs, gas was less than $2 a gallon all across America. We were exporting oil and natural gas to our friends around the world. We were undermining our enemies around the world. Instead of President Biden begging OPEC and Russia to produce more oil, we were actually shipping oil to our friends because we could produce enough for ourselves. We created great American jobs here at home. We had low-cost energy. And by the way, the technological advances we made here in this country, if there's anywhere in the world where fossil fuel production is going to be done, you want it done here because we've actually lowered carbon emissions. We were lowering carbon emissions in America while producing more energy. Now that we've become more reliant on OPEC nations, on Russia, not only is that bad for American families, they're paying more at the pump because of that crisis created by President Biden's actions. Inherited an energy-dominant nation. Now you have the President of the United States begging OPEC and Russia to produce more oil, which they're not going to do because they want oil to be over $80 a barrel, but they actually emit more carbon to produce the same oil. So oil is going to be needed to run an economy, anywhere in the world. You want to make it here because we do it better than anybody else, but that's not what's being done. We have an answer for it. I know last night President Biden was asked specifically about this crisis that he created, and his response was, quote, "I don't have a near-term answer for high gas prices." Well, President Biden might not have an answer, but we do. We have a number of bills, and I know the gentleman's pointed out, we have a number of answers. Here's one, H.R. 684, green lights the Keystone Pipeline. You want to talk about creating thousands of good jobs, private sector money, more energy independence for America? This bill would do just that, and it would do it today. And if pipelines were a problem, I know President Biden doesn't want American pipelines, but he green-lighted the Russian pipeline, the Nord Stream 2. So clearly it's not pipelines, it's American pipelines he doesn't want. Why don't we bring up H.R. 684, create jobs, lower energy costs? H.R. 543, H.R. 859 would both greenlight more production in America that President Biden shut down. There was production going on all across America. Really good, safe, environmentally sound production. That's, again, our standards are the best in the world. For people that want to bash America, go find a country that produces energy that does it better than America. We do it best, and yet President Biden, through executive action, shut a lot of that production down. These bills would open that back up again. These bills would lower gas prices. But I know President Biden isn't interested in that because in his own budget, in President Biden's budget, he specifically blocks the Corps of Engineers from doing infrastructure projects that would lower energy production. President Biden blocks that. You would think OPEC would have come up with that idea. Maybe Russia would have come up with that idea. No, that was President Biden in his own budget said you can't even do infrastructure projects if it lowers energy production. Who would come up with that? But yet that's in his budget. And so then you go to the border crisis. Again, self-created. President Biden inherited a secure border. A wall was being built. You had agreements with South America, Central American countries. Remain in Mexico was a great policy that President Biden reversed. He blocked it. Did he block it because it was bad policy? No, it was working really well, and it was agreement between two neighboring countries. He just blocked it because President Trump did it. It was working, and yet he got rid of it. He could go and reinstate that tomorrow. But we have bills that would solve the border crisis. Here, I'll read a few of them off. H.R. 4828. This is a bill I brought to the majority leader's attention back a month ago in September. This is a bill that deals with a number of problems facing our border today, and it would give more tools to our Border Patrol agents to secure our border. H.R. 471, another bill that I brought to the gentleman's attention a month ago that would help secure America's border, dealing with the crisis. None of these bills seem to draw the interest of the majority, even though every one of them would address these very real crises facing families. Not that were around a year ago. President Biden inherited a secure border, inherited energy dominance, inherited an economy that was recovering from the worst pandemic we've seen in lifetimes. And instead, with all of these actions, and then on top of that, there's a proposal to raise trillions more in taxes, more in Soviet-style spending coming out of Washington. That would make inflation worse. Gentleman's correct. We don't support those ideas that would make inflation worse, that would raise gas prices even higher, but we bring a lot of good ideas that would address these crises. We just want to see these ideas brought to the floor. When you look at the floor schedule, and there's nothing last week, next week, a month ago to address any of these crises. And these are the things that families are having the hardest time with. They're struggling. Inflation is the biggest tax on lower and middle income families. President Biden promised he wouldn't raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000. And yet, in the tax proposal that President Biden wants to bring forward by next week so that he can go fly to Europe and talk about other proposals that would make it impossible to produce energy in America, they include, among other things, a natural gas tax. That tax would fall the hardest on lower income families. Not the millionaires and the billionaires. It would be people making less than $60,000 that would be hit the hardest by a natural gas tax, yet it's in the bill. You know, you talk about adding 83,000 IRS agents. Maybe some people in Washington think that's job creation. Most people in America have shivers running down their spine at the thought of the federal government who now wants to track every transaction if they make more than $10,000 a year, to track all their transactions with 83,000 new IRS agents. Again, maybe to some that's called infrastructure. To most people, it's called a nightmare right before Halloween. Why don't we bring bills to the floor to address these crises? And if these aren't the bills that the majority likes, let's work on some other ones. But all of these would address these problems, and many of them would get us back to the point where we were, where we had a secure border, where we had energy dominance, where we had jobs being created well above what each of these last few months you've seen jobs created dramatically lower than what the projections were, because there are all of these self-created crises by the administration that are making it harder on hard-working families. It's the lowest income families that are being hit the hardest by these failed policies and all the big government socialist spending coming out of Washington. We don't need more. We need to actually go and confront the problem that's creating a debt crisis and all the other crises that families are facing, it's not going to be by spending more money and taxing people more. It's going to be by working to address each of them, starting at the root of the problem and what created them. And I would yield.
I think I can respond, nor do I intend to respond to each one of those assertions, but I noticed that the gentleman ignored totally the facts. The presentation the gentleman made, Madam Speaker, was as if the Republican policies were in place, we'd be in high cotton. Let me remind the gentleman, Donald Trump was president. You were in the majority. Republicans were in the majority, Madam Speaker. And over those 4 years, we lost a net 2.876 million people from jobs. The last 12 months of the Trump administration, 9,416,000 jobs were lost. The best year, let me remind you, the best year you had 2,820,000 new jobs. That is about an average of 235,000 jobs a month. Last month, where we all wring our hands because it came down substantially from expectations, it was 233,000. In other words, the wringing of the hands over the poor job performance you seem to reflect was the average of Mr. Trump's best year. And in fact, under this administration, helped by a bill, the American Rescue Plan, that every Republican voted against. What was the difference between the first 5 bills of 20 that were passed and the bill of 21 that every Republican voted against? Donald Trump was president. And then Joe Biden was president. It's like the debt limit, Madam Speaker. They know the debt limit has to be raised, or all of the things that the gentleman just referenced are going to be hurt very, very badly. So before you start criticizing people for not doing things to help, why don't you stop hurting the ability of the United States to present a balanced fiscal posture to our own economy and to the rest of the world, and have some certitude that America is going to remain fiscally responsible and viable and pay its bills? I don't know the answer to that question. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, the gentleman from Louisiana knows. Now, Louisiana is not yet. The gentleman from Louisiana comes from a very important, critical, energy-producing state of our nation. I don't blame him for being concerned about energy. He ought to be. We ought to all be. But very frankly, we ought to also be very concerned about global warming, which the national security apparatus of the United States of America, even during the Trump administration, said was one of the biggest existential threats to the welfare of our people and the global community. So yes, we are very concerned about reaching an environment which is not dangerous for life on this planet. That's a very big issue for us. You're right. And we're going to deal with that in the Build Back Better plan. We are dealing with it, and we're dealing with it in the BIF plan. Now, the BIF plan is a plan to spend $1.2 trillion on infrastructure investment over the next 10 years, which will make our country more competitive, will increase our ability to produce goods here in America, make it in America, which will make us more independent and self-sufficient. We found during the pandemic we weren't as self-sufficient as we should be and wanted to be. These bills that we're considering will do that. I don't expect many Republicans to vote for it. Even the transportation bill that I think they ought to be for, Donald Trump said he was going to spend $1 trillion, have a $1 trillion infrastructure program during his campaign. And then we went down to the White House, we had a meeting with him. He said, no, $1 trillion not enough, we ought to do $2 trillion. He did zero, Madam Speaker, zero. When the Republicans were there in charge, zero. Now, we're going to pass this infrastructure bill, and it's going to make a real difference. It's going to make a real difference on jobs. It's going to make a real difference on inflation. And it's going to make a real difference because we can increase the supply chain. It's going to make a real difference on the health of our globe. So I will tell the gentleman that he raises a lot of issues. And I would hope his party would start returning to a sense of bipartisanship in dealing with the legitimate problems that the gentleman raises, which we did in 2020. Now, we were in the minority. We voted with President Trump. Actually, we were in the majority, but President Trump was president, and we helped support his and the Treasury Secretary's objectives and our own objectives, and we came to agreement, bipartisan agreement. Very frankly, it is unbelievable to me, Madam Speaker, that in the debt limit, the minority leader of the United States Senate, and very frankly, the gentleman just said, we all understand we don't want to, I presume he doesn't believe we ought to not raise our debt limit. I believe he wants us to pay our bills because he knows the catastrophic impact if we don't. But I don't understand why they won't support that. That's not an issue of Democrat or Republican. We all created that debt in one form or another. And certainly last year, we did a big number because we thought we needed to meet the pandemic, and we did, and we saved millions of jobs in the process. So my friend has these bills. We have bills. We're prepared to talk about proposals, as I've told my friend in the past. But very frankly, there needs to be, on some issues that ought not to be political at all, like the debt limit, a statement that we are loyal to our country, not to Democrats. I said this the other day to the gentleman, the loyal opposition, not to Democrats, not to me as the majority leader, not to any of us, but to the country. And I would implore my friend because we're going to have to do the debt limit. We're going to have to do an omnibus. We're going to have to do the debt limit. We want to do Build Back Better. We want to do the infrastructure bill. Those are 4 pieces of big legislation we want to do before December 3rd. And I'm hopeful that we can get some cooperation from the Republicans. And I mentioned the debt limit because that is an issue that you came to us under the Trump administration and asked us to help with. We knew it was critical for the interests of the country, and on 3 different occasions, we voted with the President at the Secretary of Treasury under the Trump administration's request and voted to make sure that America did not default on its bills. Can I ask the gentleman, will at least, Madam Speaker, the gentleman indicate that they will support making sure that America continues to pay its bills? And I yield my time.
Thank the gentleman, and I sure hope that the gentleman is concerned not just about making sure the credit card bill is paid, but making sure that the spending that maxed out the credit card is being done responsibly.
And there's that's not the question I asked.
There are some key facts the gentleman left out in his conversation about how we got here. Because we got here because in January, one party, the Democrat Party, who is in the majority in the House, is in the majority in the Senate, and has control of the White House, made a decision. I don't agree with the decision, but made a decision that they were going to go it alone on the spending side. They decided that they were going to go max out the credit card. We urged them not to do it. We still to this day are urging not to go and just spend trillions and trillions more dollars. If you want to work with us on what the responsible decision should be, we're right here. We've been here from the beginning. Do you know to this day, President Biden has not met, we're in October, late October, President Biden has not met with the House Republican leadership on any of these issues, any of them. The gentleman referenced a number of opportunities where, as it was described, we were there to help President Trump. You weren't just there to help President Trump. You were in the meetings when the decisions were being made. Paycheck Protection Program was not a partisan exercise. In fact, it was one of the most successful bipartisan exercises I've seen Congress come together and do. Everybody was in the room making those decisions. They were all very important decisions, big decisions, involved a lot of money, and we all made those decisions together. We all voted for those bills together, and then ultimately the spending that went along with it, the debt that went along with it, was part of that negotiation, and we voted for it together. There's not been a decision made this year where the majority has negotiated with the minority to figure out if we could come to agreement, so you did it on your own. And look, you had the votes to do it. But when you max out the credit card on your own, don't come and chide our side and say, well, you need to be there to pay the bill, when we weren't included in the decision to max out the credit card. And now that the credit card's maxed out, it's not like there's an effort to slow down. In fact, it seems like it's full steam ahead. Damn the torpedoes. Spend trillions of dollars more on additional things like, again, 83,000 more IRS agents. Do you think anybody on this side supports that? That's not something we support. And it will rack up more debt, by the way. We don't support it, but I guess you expect we should pay for it even if we don't support it. Maybe if there was a negotiation where both sides were part of it. Sam Gray is the ranking member of the Transportation Committee, has not been included in any of these decisions on infrastructure. Yet I'm sure you would expect him to vote for whatever comes out of a partisan exercise. That's not how things work, and I know the gentleman knows that. But again, if the president wanted to work with us,
or you're just going to continue to say facts that are not true.
The gentleman, of course those are true.
They're not true.
We all negotiated on the 3 different debt ceiling increases that happened under the Trump administration, including CARES, Paycheck Protection Program. They were very bipartisan. Does the gentleman disagree with that?
I do not disagree with it.
Those are the facts. And so when you look at those facts, the gentleman talked about jobs and COVID. Before COVID happened, we had the hottest economy maybe in the history of our country. Wages were up for every demographic group. Those are facts. You saw small businesses up. Women-owned small businesses were up over 20%. African-American unemployment was at its lowest level. Hispanic unemployment at its lowest level. And then COVID came along. You know, maybe there's a reason why the majority won't hold a hearing on the origin of COVID. But if you want to just say because of COVID, all of that is Donald Trump's fault, clearly the economy shut down, and we worked to get it back going again, and it's coming back. And frankly, some of the efforts to pay people not to work, and it's not just enhanced unemployment, it's a whole list of things, are hurting the recovery. But those things were happening before COVID hit a year and a half ago. And it was because of good, sound policies that got us a secure border, that got us energy dominance. And frankly, it was things like that that helped us get the economy going again, because it was creating good jobs. Keystone Pipeline was moving forward. Those are good union jobs, by the way. And that was ended by President Biden unilaterally. Never even tried to have a meeting and a conversation with us to see if we could come to agreement. And again, I guess it's the prerogative of the majority. If you're in the majority, you don't have to talk to the minority. But just because you didn't talk to the minority, you made decisions on your own about what you wanted to do. You didn't try to reach agreement with us. To come to us after the fact when you've spent trillions of dollars, it's wreaked havoc through our economy, it's led to inflation we haven't seen in generations, gas prices we haven't seen in decades. Then you want to come and not ask us how to fix it. We've got ideas on how to fix it. You ask us to pay the bill. Why don't we work together on the front end and not rack up trillions more in spending, because the things the gentleman talked about would rack up trillions more in spending, which created these problems, which we were not a part of those conversations. I wish we were part of the conversations, and it was done in a bipartisan way. But again, President Biden, 10 months into his administration, has yet to sit down and meet with House Republican leadership to talk about any of these ideas and solutions we could come up with together, which is how it should be done. And I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The reason I said he was misstating the facts, we have a bipartisan bill. It wasn't done by the Democratic leadership. It frankly wasn't done by the Republican leadership. It's done by members of the United States Senate on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. And that bill was sent over here with almost half of the Republicans in the United States Senate voting for it. And your leadership is lobbying against that infrastructure bill, which would help all the issues you raised. You're urging a no vote on that. And you're threatening members who are going to vote for it, maybe not very many, because they know it is a bipartisan bill.
No
So
one's
when
being-
I
no
hear,
one's being
Madam
threatened,
Speaker,
Mr.
the whip is talking about bipartisanship, there has been so little bipartisanship, and when there is bipartisanship, their members are disciplined. When there's bipartisanship on saying that it wasn't a protest, it was an insurrection, there was no bipartisanship on that. It was we don't care what it was. We don't care that some people were killed. We don't really care that they were trying to stop the counting of votes for President of the United States of America. It was just a protest. That's what the President Trump, former president, said the other day. What a bunch of hooey. There clearly has been a conscious decision made by the leadership on the other side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, against a bill that had 69 votes in the United States Senate. We only have 50. And it's being lobbied against by, why? To hurt Joe Biden. Yes, they voted, Madam Speaker, for the 5 bills. Why? Because ultimately Donald Trump was for them. Not everybody voted for him, but the majority. And as I said, CARES, $2 trillion, absolutely essential, was passed. But the gentleman refuses to answer the question except to say, well, the credit card was maxed out. The credit card was maxed out by date in a couple of those votes, which we helped as the responsible opposition. As we did with John Boehner and Paul Ryan when they couldn't get votes to pass bills to keep government open or to keep the United States from defaulting. Yes, we cast the responsible vote. It's not a popular vote because it's demagogue, Madam Speaker. It has nothing to do with the debt. The debt has when you pass spending or pass revenue cuts. That's what affects the debt. And that's what all of us do, one way or the other. And so we're all responsible. And we ought to all be responsible, but the Senate leader on the Republican side of the aisle said he's not going to do anything. Not only will he not do anything, Madam Speaker, he will not allow the majority to do it on their own. Because he is going to filibuster. So it requires 60 votes. We don't have 60 votes. We have 51. So not only will they not do the responsible thing on debt, which would adversely affect, if we do not extend it, all of the things that the minority whip lamented were wrong, would all be adversely affected if, for the first time in history, Madam Speaker, we failed to extend the debt limit, which, by the way, very few countries have, 1 or 2, because it's a phony issue. The debt's not phony, but the limit is controlled by what budgets we pass, what tax cuts we pass, what policies we pass. And once we do that, we go in the store, as Jim McGovern, the chair of the Rules Committee, we go in the restaurant, we buy the steak. You need to pay for the steak. And the argument, Madam Speaker, of, oh, well, you're proposing a lot of spending in the future, totally unrelated. The debt limit is caused by the debt that we already incurred. 2 bills that we have, they don't affect the debt limit. We've met it now, not when we pass these bills, not after we make that commitment. We have a debt limit coming up now on December 3rd, which was totally irresponsible in and of itself, for political reasons only, coterminous with the funding of government. 2019, when we took over, the government was shut down. We spent a lot of time opening it up. That hurt the economy. That hurt jobs. Now, at that point in time, it didn't hurt inflation And I've been amazed over the years, over the last 10 years, that we haven't had more inflation for a number of reasons. But he didn't answer the question whether he'd help on that. That's not for us. It's not for Democrats. It's not for Republicans. It's for our country. It's for our economy. It's for global fiscal stability. So I would hope at least in that area, not for us. I'm not asking you to do it for me, or Madam Speaker. I'm not asking anybody to do it for me or for my party or for the President of the United States. Mitch McConnell says it's the country and the global community that could not afford default. And that's true. Let me tell you, I think that's the first step to showing bipartisan responsibility together, not for one another, but for our country, Madam Speaker. And I hope that at some point in time, we can show that kind of good faith and also show some good faith. I included this morning the remarks that President George W. Bush made in Pennsylvania, Shanksville, and the kind of America that he wanted to see. I would hope all my Republican colleagues would read what George W. Bush had to say. It is so much different from the rhetoric of the current leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, in terms of bringing us together as a country. I yield.
Thank the gentleman. I'd be happy to answer the question. Might not be the answer the gentleman wants, but I would be happy to be a part of an actual bipartisan negotiation on how to solve our country's debt. That has not happened. But if you look at the bill that the gentleman brought to this floor to deal with the debt over a month ago, it absolutely dealt with spending, not that already happened, but that will happen in the future, including the trillions of dollars of debt-laden bills that spend more money in Washington. And it picked a date, and the date that the gentleman put in the bill he brought to this House floor was December 31st of 2022. That's not spending we've already done. That's spending that the majority plans to do in a very partisan way, not just through this year, but through all of next year. And when we're not even included in those decisions, then you come and say, well, you should just be expected to pay for whatever we want to spend, trillions more, between now and the end of a year and over a year from now. That's not a negotiation. That's not even an attempt to want to work with the other side. Now, again, gentleman's in the majority. In the Senate, they're in the majority. And the gentleman very well knows that both sides have the ability, if you want to do the spending on your own, to address the debt that would be created by all of that spending on your own. Doesn't take 60 votes. Gentleman's well aware that there's a legislative instrument that if all the spending wants to be done in a partisan way, and I'm talking about the trillions that are still laying in front of us, that the gentleman said may come to the floor next week, not necessarily will, might come to the floor, might come to the floor a month from now, might come to the floor a year from now. And we won't even be included in those negotiations, but we ought to be expected to vote for the debt that would be racked up by it. If the other side were being asked to do that, you know your majority wouldn't go for that. But we wouldn't do it. We would at least include you in a negotiation. If we didn't want to, then we would be responsible for doing it on our own if we did the spending on our own. And the tools are there to do just that. Threatening to default on the nation's debt when legislative instruments are included in this majority to not have default is irresponsible. And that threat keeps being thrown out there by the majority, even though the majority knows they could, with a majority vote in the House and a majority vote in the Senate, address the debt that wants to be racked up between now and next December. Again, I would urge that all of that new spending doesn't happen, that we come together and negotiate what budget limits should be, like we've done in the past, under Republican and Democrat presidents. Those were bipartisan deals. There's been no bipartisan attempt to do that this year. And why is there an opposition to infrastructure? Well, first of all, if there was a desire to do bipartisan infrastructure, you're going to find a lot of takers over here. And I know the gentleman made an assertion, probably not realizing, but there have been no threats made on our side of the aisle on a bill. Now, I see people being followed in the bathrooms on the other side and all kind of other things being done. No threats on this side. What we've said is we want an infrastructure negotiation, but the day that the deal was reached in the Senate with the president, he turned around about an hour later and undermined that deal by tying it, linking it to the tax and spend bill. That's when it became a problem, because taxing and spending trillions more dollars would be a problem to this country. It would hurt middle-class families and lower-income families to have that natural gas tax, to have all the additional inflation on top of the inflation they already see. All of those reasons are why that package, not the individual bill, because as the president himself has said multiple times, as the speaker herself has said multiple times, it's not a standalone bill. It's not two standalone bills. It is a package. They're married together at the hip. That's where the opposition comes from. And by the way, there is a really good bipartisan infrastructure bill that's out there. S-3011 came over from the Senate unanimously. About $500 billion of infrastructure is authorized in this bill. I would ask the gentleman if he would bring this up for a vote. It would probably fly overwhelmingly, and it would allow for, again, about $500 billion immediately that could be spent on infrastructure all across this country, plus an additional large sum next year, maybe $100 billion next year, on top of the $500 billion, and it just passed out of the Senate unanimously. Every Republican, every Democrat supported this bill. This is real infrastructure. This is not tied to some tax and spend bill that maybe the gentleman might think is a good idea. We surely don't. We know how damaging it would be to our country and our economy and to middle and lower income families. This is a very bipartisan bill that could be bipartisan here, where we could be a part of a negotiation on something really good, where states wouldn't have to wait months. They've got the money ready to go today. This gives them the flexibility to make their own decisions on what's best for the infrastructure in each of these states. Maryland would be able to control their own destiny on over $1 billion. Louisiana would be control their own destiny on over $1 billion today if this bill passed. So absolutely, we support real infrastructure. If it's tied together and married to something that would be devastating the economy, of course not. And maybe if the majority would look at delinking those two and abandoning the bill that would raise taxes, and even internally in the Democrat conference, those discussions have been going on. That's not just Republicans asking for that. There are a number of Democrats asking for that too. That would be a bipartisan initiative to say we're jettisoning this idea that we're going to raise hundreds of billions, if not multiple trillions, whatever the number. If it's $1 trillion, $5 trillion, it would be devastating to our economy and to middle-class families. Let's abandon that and go work on something that would actually be real infrastructure that we could all rally behind, and it would pass overwhelmingly. Be good for the country. President Biden would get to sign it into law. We would support that, and I'd ask the gentleman to look at S-3011, and if not a supporter of that plan that passed with 100 senators, maybe there's a better idea, but this one's a really good one that got every Republican and every Democrat in the Senate earlier this week to say yes, and we'd be happy to say yes to it as well if we're given that opportunity, and I'd yield to the gentleman.
Madam Speaker, I think that bill passed the Senate Wednesday, so we'll look at it, but we haven't had a chance to look at it at this point in time. I want to get back. I know this sounds like a broken record on the debt limit, but the gentleman makes the point, Madam Speaker, that somehow we've raised the debt to accommodate spending. That's what you always do, because if you reach the debt limit, you're done. You stop Social Security, you stop veterans payments, you stop any support payments, you stop paying the armed services of the United States. That's the spending you stop when you can no longer incur debt. Why? Because we spent a lot of money and we put it on the credit card and it's coming due, and it comes due on a regular basis, and we got to pay it on a regular basis. And the gentleman has voted for bills that do exactly what the bill he lamented and none of his colleagues voted for, Madam Speaker, exactly what he asked us to do. Extend it by a date. Not a number, by a date. And then he hypothesizes, well, in that time frame, you're going to incur additional expenses. He's absolutely right. So he is lamenting and giving us a reason for his not voting for it is because there are some proposals to spend money in the future. There are lots of them from all sides. And then he brings up this tied together. Let me tell you who's tied it together. The Republican leadership has tied these together, and yes, the president talked about it. He said, no, they're not tied together. He said, first of all, tied together, and they said, no, I negotiated this bill, we're going to do it. But I will tell him, as the majority leader who brings bills to the floor, the infrastructure bill passed overwhelmingly on a bipartisan vote and put together in a bipartisan vote, Republicans, Democrats, and the President of the United States. Now, he is the President of the United States. I know the gentleman voted against certifying his election in a bipartisan move, I suppose. But, Madam Speaker, that bill will be brought up separately. You can vote for that bill on its merits and vote against it on its merits. Do not hide behind you don't like some other bill. Because Donald Trump said he was going to do $1 trillion on infrastructure to help our economy. He didn't do it. Then he said it was going to be $2 trillion. He didn't do it. Republicans were in the majority. They controlled the House and the Senate. They didn't do it. We have a bill they can vote for. I would urge them to vote for extending the debt limit so our country meets its full faith and credit obligations, and for the infrastructure bill, because I think it is a bipartisan bill negotiated by Republicans, by Democrats, and by the President of the United States that will help our economy. And as I said, and I will reiterate, every issue that the gentleman raised, Madam Speaker, in his opening remarks. I yield back, and I'm about to yield.
Thank the gentleman again. And there's clearly a bipartisan bill on infrastructure that we'd be happy to support, S 3011. Nobody in the House on the Republican side was included in any of those negotiations, including the ranking member of the Transportation Committee, who he himself has been urging a large bill. $450 billion was put on the table, which, by the way, if that were passed, it would be the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the United States. And yet, he was pushed out of the negotiations. And again, the majority has that ability because they're in the majority, but they surely never tried a bipartisan negotiation. And as well as the gentleman knows, on those prior budget agreements, wasn't just voted for or against because of who was in the White House. It was voted for by both parties because the negotiation on what that spending limit was agreed upon by the leadership of both sides. House, Senate, Republican, Democrat, we came to agreement on those budgets. And that's why the gentleman voted for it. That's why I voted for it, because it was a negotiated agreement. There were give and take on a number of items. But ultimately, you agreed by a date certain, but under a budget agreement. There's a date certain of December 31st of 2022 that has no bipartisan agreement. We know what a lot of the spending will be because trillions have already been spent that we were not included in. We opposed, strongly opposed, and the gentleman knew that when he brought the bills to the floor, but they wanted to bring them to the floor anyway because you had the votes. And I get it, that's the way majorities work. But if you decide to exclude one party from negotiations and go spend the money anyway, and then have a whole list of trillions more in spending down the road and include that in a bill, don't really think anybody expects the people who are pushed to the curb to vote for the credit card limit being increased when all the spending that's going to continue to be racked up, not that's already been racked up, that would be racked up between now and December 31st of 2022 is going to be done in a partisan way. And that's what the record has been so far this year on the trillions that have already been added by bills passed by this majority. They weren't bipartisan. And again, that's the prerogative of the majority. We've stood here ready. We've listed bill after bill to address crises after crises, none of which have been brought to the floor. We're still ready to go to solve these problems. We've talked about a bipartisan bill on infrastructure that we can support. Ultimately, the majority makes that decision. Yield back.
Madam Speaker, if this Congress had never met this year, we would have to extend the debt limit at some point in time this year. That is a fact. And Mr. McConnell has said it is inconceivable that we would not extend the debt limit of the United States of America and fail our obligation under full faith and credit. As a matter of fact, the Constitution on the 14th Amendment says it shall not be questioned, but we have to take some legislative action. And the issue is, what is our responsibility to the United States of America? Not all this argument that pretends that somehow some bills that are proposed on spending, or some that may have been passed this year, if they hadn't been passed, somehow we wouldn't have to do this. If anybody on either side of the aisle believes that to be the case, they ought to be defeated by their constituents because they don't know what's going on here. On either side of the aisle. And this is a very serious issue with respect to jobs, infrastructure, inflation, health care, environment. All of those will be adversely affected in terms of and the global community itself if we do not extend this debt. We can argue about the other issues, but there's no argument about this issue. Every Republican president has asked that this be done. Every Republican Secretary of Treasury, since I've been in this Congress 41 years, has asked that we extend the debt limit. Every one of them, without fail. And every one of them has said, President Reagan on, that if we did not do it, the country's economy, reputation, and well-being would be put disastrously at risk. I don't want bipartisanship. I want patriotism. I want people committed to their country and their country's well-being to stand up and say, I'm not going to demagogue an issue that is so critically important to the welfare of my nation. And I said to the gentleman again, exactly what we passed, they passed when they were in the majority, and we voted for it, setting a future date. Not a number, a future date. Exactly. We didn't ask them to do anything more than we did. And in terms of bipartisanship, I will again say, you've got a bipartisan bill, negotiated in a bipartisan way, that would be coming to this floor at some point in time, I hope earlier rather than later, separately. Not tied to, I don't like this bill, I don't like that bill, so I won't do this, I won't do that, won't do the other, which will substantially grow jobs in our country, deal with the climate crisis in our country. And I would ask you to support both of those propositions when they come to the floor in a show of bipartisan support for our country, not for each other, but for our country. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, we need to do this in a bipartisan way, which hasn't happened, but partisanship is not patriotism. And we've seen a lot of partisanship. Again, if President Biden, I've served in leadership under 3 different presidents now, when we had to negotiate how to come together on the priorities of our government, how to properly fund things and deal with our debt, under President Obama, we had those bipartisan meetings in the White House. When President Trump came in, we had those bipartisan meetings in the White House. Still to this day, late October, 10 months into his presidency, there's not been a single time where President Biden has brought a bipartisan group of our leadership together. I understand he's met with Democrat leadership many times in the White House. And again, that's his prerogative. He's the president, you're in the majority. If you want to do all of this in a partisan way, I don't suggest it's healthy. I don't suggest it's the right way. Every president I've served under in leadership has had bipartisan meetings to have these conversations and come to agreement. That has not happened under this president. He ought to go and live by the words that he promised during the campaign, that he would work with both parties in a bipartisan way. To not have met with House Republican leadership once during his presidency 10 months in is not an acceptable way to run this government. And then all of a sudden things end up partisan and everybody throws their hands up and go, how did this happen? Just reach out. He's the President of the United States. If he says, let's go tomorrow, we'll be there tomorrow, but he won't do that. We've asked for meetings. At some point, they have to happen. Again, if he doesn't want them to happen, that's his prerogative, because the same party controls all levers of government. But if the same party controls all levers of government and wants to just toss aside the other party in either chamber, oh, we worked with senators. Even some of those senators that were mentioned are not supporting what's happening with debt because there's been no negotiation with both parties on the debt, on the spending that gets us to the debt. And so there can be proposals for trillions more in spending. And if we oppose it, we've been very clear about why we have that opposition. It wasn't us who married those bills together. President Biden came here just 2 weeks ago. They said he was going to be closing the deal. He was going to be the closer. They're going to have a vote on the House floor. Speaker promised there would be a vote on the House floor. And instead, at that meeting, it's been reported that he said the two bills are tied together. Since then, he said, I want both of them coming to me. He's tied them together. I wish he wouldn't. That's the president's prerogative. He's made it very clear. The speaker's made it very clear. It's not been our side that's done that. We want to separate those as a package, but they've been kept together as a package. And until then, at least we've been looking for other opportunities, and we found one. In S-3011 that passed the Senate unanimously, that would be $500 billion in real infrastructure today. Every governor, every state would have the ability to start doing $500 billion in new infrastructure projects. We think that would be really good for our country. We support it. We're ready to negotiate. I would yield.
Madam Speaker, this needs to come to an end, obviously, but I will tell you this. As I stand here, as somebody who sat on this floor on January 6th, and the question was, would the House perform its function of accepting the Electoral College vote to elect this president? It wasn't that there hadn't been voices in the past who have raised questions. But there was no effort by Ms. Clinton, who received a majority of the votes, or Mr. Gore, who received a majority of the votes, to raise a question about the legitimacy of the election. But we had an insurrection incited by, invited by, and deployed by the President of the United States. So we didn't start on a very good bipartisan basis. Again, not because Republicans should have been happy that their candidate was not elected, or any more than we were happy that our candidate was not elected in the Clinton and Gore campaigns. But it was, at least we ought to uphold the constitutional principles. Vice President Pence did, and there were people in this Capitol on that night who wanted to see him apparently eliminated. That wasn't a good bipartisan start, Madam Speaker. The majority of Republicans voted against certifying the Electoral College results in state after state. But we ought to put that behind us. That's done. What we're doing now is we are acting on behalf of the country. And the two issues that I've dwelt on, because I think we have agreement on that rhetorically and intellectually, but not electorally, not in terms of voting, is the debt limit should never be breached, and that we need to invest in infrastructure. Two simple propositions. The Senate Minority Leader says we should never breach the full faith and credit of the United States of America. But I won't help you do it. I don't get that. Frankly, it seems to me kind of irrational. And then an infrastructure bill passed overwhelmingly by the United States Senate, which we are putting on the floor unchanged, as it was, not coupled, as it is and was, and saying, let's vote for that. I yield back.
We stand ready to work if there is bipartisan efforts made. We'll see if that develops. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on the House floor about Summer Barrow. Summer was born on the 4th of July and was named for the season. Her mother, Carrie Colvin, said that Summer was a firecracker. She was vivacious. She loved to dance. She loved to sing. She loved music. But Summer died of a fentanyl overdose in January of 2020. Summer's substance use disorder began after she was prescribed oxycodone after a car accident, and when the prescription ran out, she turned to heroin. This vibrant young woman lost her life to a substance use disorder, and amid her loss, her mother, Carrie, has turned to advocacy. And in her honor, I was proud to introduce the Bipartisan Support for Recovery Act, legislation that would create guaranteed funding stream for recovery support services and community organizations. Of her daughter, Carrie said, "I know what she would want is to say, please get help. This bill would help deliver that help to others, just as Summer and so many others that we have lost to substance use disorder would have wanted." Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There comes a time to dispel the myth that we must choose between women's rights and children's rights. Now is the time because we can protect both. Sadly, abortion reveals society's inability to love, to protect, and to care for the most innocent and helpless among us. When we devalue life, our society suffers. When we deem some to be non-essential, we devalue their lives. I'm strongly pro-life, and I consistently stand up for the rights of the unborn and the born. Our society is willing to and does care for the mother in need. Perhaps she's scared and alone. Americans across the country reach out to help mothers and the children that they are nourishing in their wombs. I must rise today to express my grave concern that our Democrat colleagues' proposed spending bill lacks crucial protections that ensure that taxpayer funds do not pay for abortions. Without this protection, taxpayer-funded abortions not only harm us as a society, it violates the religious freedoms of thousands of Americans. The long-standing bipartisan Hyde Amendment ensures just that. The taxpayer funds do not go towards abortion. However, the Democrats' currently proposed multi-trillion-dollar Build Back Broke plan does not contain those life-saving protections. In 1994, then-Senator Joe Biden wrote, "Those of us who are opposed to abortion should not be compelled to pay
The
for them."
gentleman's time is
In
expired.
God we trust. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 7 months ago, Democrats passed a historic tax cut for middle-class families and lifted millions of children out of poverty. Since then, some of my conservative colleagues have had the audacity to complain that we helped too many children. In my district, here's what it means when 97% of families are eligible for the child tax credit. For Yvette, it means healthy food on the table. For Sarah, it means being able to afford her child's preschool tuition. This money goes straight into our local economy, helping parents get back to work and build the future that their children deserve. But without a clean extension of the child tax credit, American families will lose this critical support just as the economy begins to recover. This tax credit isn't a handout. It's about putting hard-earned tax dollars back in the pockets of working families with children. And for any of my colleagues who won't vote to help their constituents, let me be clear. I will vote for the families in your districts and mine because our children deserve nothing less. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize the storied career of Admiral Craig Fowler, Commander of the U.S. Southern Command. Admiral Fowler is a native of Freiburg, Pennsylvania, a small town located in Clarion County, the Pennsylvania 15th Congressional District. His naval career started in 1983, following his graduation from the U.S. Naval Academy with a degree in systems engineering. From there, he went on to serve during the Gulf War. During his service, Admiral Fowler has held a variety of posts and positions, from supporting the United Nations sanctions against Iraq, the humanitarian efforts following a devastating tsunami off Indonesia, to supporting Operations New Dawn and Enduring Freedom. His service took him all over the world. Regardless of location, either on the sea or ashore, Admiral Fowler consistently provided leadership and guidance. Admiral Fowler currently serves as Commander of the U.S. Southern Command and will be retiring from the Navy at the end of this month. Admiral Fowler, thank you for your service to the United States of America. Your dedication to our country is admirable. Enjoy your retirement. You deserve it. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
I want to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you so very much. Madam Speaker, it gives me great joy when I can come to the floor and really speak directly to the moms and dads and families that right now, as we stand on the floor, are probably looking to gather children from schools, looking at what they're going to do over the weekend, maybe doing grocery shopping, and looking at the resources that they do have or do not have. And so it is important that we immediately pass the Build Back Better Act, and that those who have a difference of opinion realize that it is always a greater good that what America has always been back. When we've gone to war, we've not gone to war to be an offender. We've gone to war to defend principles of democracy. So I believe the Build Back Better Act will provide greater pricing of prescription drugs, strengthening the Affordable Care Act, expanding Medicaid for some 12 states. The state of Texas happens to be one of them, where 733,000 plus people are uninsured. These are working people. Expanding that federal Medicaid is going to help those people in states like Kansas and South Dakota. If they won't speak for themselves, I'll speak for America. In addition, the care economy really says that we must give child care and universal kindergarten to people so that we can be advanced and our people can be helped. Finally, let me say that voting is important and crucial. We must pass voting rights. I yield back. This is Build Back Better America, and Build Back makes America the best country in the world. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to celebrate the life of Corporal Dwayne E. Dewey for his service, sacrifice, and dedication to our country. Corporal Dewey's instinctive action and bravery on April 16, 1952, saved the lives of a number of his fellow soldiers and earned him the highest military decoration for valor, the Medal of Honor. He began his service in the Marine Corps in 1951 when he enlisted for the duration of the Korean War. On that day in April, Corporal Dewey and his fellow Marine, April of 1952, Corporal Dewey and his fellow Marines were engaged in a firefight where they were outnumbered more than 20 to 1. During this fight, Corporal Dewey was wounded in the legs by an enemy grenade. And while being treated for this injury, another grenade was thrown within reach. At a moment's notice, Corporal Dewey grabbed the grenade and literally sat on it while pulling the medic who was treating him onto his body, using his body as a shield to save those around him. Amazingly, although he sustained severe injuries from both grenades and a separate additional bullet wound to the abdomen, Corporal Dewey survived the fight. These actions of this great, brave, and courageous man earned Corporal Dewey the Medal of Honor, which I hold here today, his challenge coin. And it was actually presented by President Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, his first one that he did personally, who notably remarked, accurately I would say, remarked that Corporal Dewey must have a, quote, body of steel. Well, Madam Speaker, Corporal Dewey is the epitome of an American hero, and we honor his legacy and never forget his selfless actions. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, in 1886, a product was brought online, Coca-Cola, and it remained one of the most popular products of all time until 1985, 99 years later, and they came out with a great idea, New Coke. The problem is, New Coke was a terrible idea, and 3 months later they brought back what they call Classic Coke because of this terrible, terrible idea that had to be fixed. Making our military be vaccinated against their will is a terrible, terrible idea that needs to be fixed. Let me be clear, I've been vaccinated, and I have encouraged everyone to talk to their doctors and see if the vaccine is right for them. But ultimately, vaccination is a choice that shouldn't be mandated on our fighting men and women. As of yesterday, 30% of our total force remains completely unvaccinated. Are we prepared to lose 30% of the total force? How do we think that's going to impact military readiness? The Pentagon, when they came out with this program, said it was for military readiness. Come on. Some branches of the military offer a waiver for religious reasons. But what if a breastfeeding mother isn't comfortable getting the vaccine? I've heard from several breastfeeding mothers. This needs to be fixed. I ask all my colleagues to join me in this effort. New Coke is not working. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to express my continued opposition to Elizabeth Warren and House Democrat efforts to expand the IRS to spy on everyday Americans' bank accounts with transactions over $600, and I know there's been talk of raising that to $10,000. I'm opposed to all of this. Madam Speaker, the banks already have mechanisms in place to catch suspicious activity. Those are called SARs, or Suspicious Activity Reports. We don't need additional tools by the IRS to harass everyday working Americans who are struggling to pay their bills. If the intention by the Democrats is to go after people who are billionaires and multimillionaires who are not paying their taxes, then spying on average Americans' bank accounts with over $600 transactions is not going to do it. So we have to do things in a better way. We have to focus the IRS's time to where it is best served, and that's to focus on tax sheets, not everyday average working Americans. I urge opposition to this infringement of our rights. Madam Chair, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to express once again my sincere dismay that Democrats continue to ignore the wishes of the American people by removing the Hyde Amendment and other life-affirming protections for the unborn from their bills, including their big government socialist tax and spend reconciliation bill. My constituents are righteously angry that Democrats in control of this body time and time again choose to violate the sanctity of life. Moreover, they're furious at the thought of their tax dollars being used to violently end the lives of millions of unborn babies, millions of precious heartbeats in the womb. Madam Speaker, you and I both know full well that the Hyde Amendment has saved lives. This is not just an opinion, but a proven fact that simply cannot be ignored. I will always stand in support of the Hyde Amendment and unapologetically fight for the sanctity of life. And I urge my Democrat colleagues to abandon their political charade and restore the Hyde in the bipartisan way it has been supported for almost 45 years. Now, again, I urge you to restore the Hyde Amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, any trust that Dr. Fauci might have gained over the course of the pandemic is now completely out the window. He must be resigned and his case referred for prosecution for perjury. For the past year and a half, critical decisions for the whole country have hinged off of Dr. Fauci's advice and decrees. 2 presidents have used his advice as a basis for our nation's response to COVID-19. Yet here we have clear proof that he's been intentionally lying to Congress. How can any American trust his judgment or that he will tell them the truth then when we can look members of Congress in the eye and boldly lie about the gain of function research? Dr. Fauci has repeatedly testified in the House and Senate that the National Institute of Health did not fund research that was gain of function and had a heated exchange over the specific claim with Senator Rand Paul. The NIH notified Congress that it was aware as of 2018 and 2020 that EcoHealth Alliance did conduct gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. This research was not allowed under the grant's rules. EcoHealth Alliance has also sought a grant from the DARPA in 2018, but was denied funding because they were worried that it might be potentially gain-of-function research. Dr. Fauci must resign and must be prosecuted. I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4, 2021, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Interesting times we're living through. I understood that that was also a curse. May you live through interesting times. And we certainly are enduring that. I see an article from the New York Post, October 18, 2021. It's entitled, Biden Secretly Flying Underage Migrants into New York in Dead of Night. Now, what we've come to see at the border in Texas is that the administration, this administration, has learned that, gee, we've got a record number of people pouring into this country illegally, but if we can ship them away from the border quickly enough, people don't see them massed by the thousands. And so if they don't see them, no harm, no foul. I guess they're thinking if no one's in the forest to hear a tree fall, does it really fall? Well, the truth is, when you abandon the rule of law, then a nation based on the rule of law will not last much beyond that. This is devastating to the country. And some would say, well, you know what? It's so compassionate to invite people. Well, when you hear from doctors that probably 25% of the women they see have been raped along the way, you see children separated from their parents in order to come, in order to give them a better chance of staying in the United States so the parents can someday follow. You see people that become indentured servants of the drug cartels, selling drugs, sex trafficking, human trafficking. That's not very compassionate. It seems the most compassionate thing that people in the United States could do, the United States government could do for our friends and neighbors to the south would be to secure our southern border so nobody comes in illegally. That would keep out the drugs, the fentanyl, those things that are killing 70,000 people a year in the United States. But it would, the big thing, though, for our neighbors would be that the tens of billions of dollars pouring across our border to the drug cartels that allows them to corrupt every level of Mexican government would stop. And people wouldn't have to live in fear of the drug cartels controlling Mexico, controlling countries to the south. That would be the compassionate thing to do. I'm joined by my dear friend from Virginia, Congressman Bob Good, and I would like to yield such time as he would use.
Thank you to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Gohmert. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, there are so many crises in this country right now. While many of us recognize that this president was a hard left radical, probably most of us underestimated the speed and the effectiveness with which he could ruin just about every situation, every issue in our country. It's hard, therefore, to determine or to identify what is the greatest threat to the country right now. What is the greatest crisis that faces our country right now? With no hope on the horizon, by the way, for any of them to get better under this administration. Whether it's the vaccine mandates, things we couldn't imagine just a year or two ago. I mean, when this president ran for office, he said he wouldn't issue a vaccine mandate if he were to win. And now we see it today where people are being laid off. Those who were heroes over the past year and a half are now zeros and getting fired from their job. Those who kept us safe on a daily basis, the first responders, the healthcare workers, our military. So is the vaccine mandates, is it the out-of-control, reckless, irresponsible, unprecedented spending that we see? I mean, we already have $28, $29 trillion worth of debt, which is some $80,000, $90,000 per American. And yet we find ourselves today with the majority party trying to determine how they can come together for another 5, 6 trillion, whatever the amount might be. Is it the spending? Is it our education system? Whether it's the just the product that we're not getting with how much we spend on education, the federal mandates, the intrusion into local and state education, whether it's the teaching of CRT or that sort of philosophy, whether it's transgender policy, whether it's masks and vaccines on children, which as others have submitted, I would agree is child abuse, with no demonstrated medical justification for masks on children or vaccines for young adults who are at almost no risk from COVID. Are those the greatest issues? Is it foreign policy? We've got China saber-rattling, shooting off missiles. We got the debacle in Afghanistan. You know, North Korea, Iran, Russia certainly have no reason to fear us under this president. Is it that 30% rise in violent crime while our police are at threat of their funding being reduced, or are they being undermined and harassed? They're told to stand down in the face of looting and violence in their cities? Is it massive inflation, the hidden tax on every American, where their savings, their hard-earned resources are being depleted by too many dollars chasing too few goods? Is it the breakdown in the supply chain and what that's going to mean in the coming months ahead? Is it our declaring war on American energy and forcing us to again depend on foreign provision from hostile nations for our energy, the jobs that are lost in that, the higher gas prices? But I submit to your point, Congressman Gohmert, immigration, illegal immigration, and the invasion, the absolute invasion at our southern border may be the biggest crisis. As you know well, the Constitution says, Article 4, Section 1, it's the responsibility of the federal government to protect the states from invasion, and that is clearly not happening And I submit, as we talk about this issue, never in the history of our country has our own president intentionally done more to harm the nation than this president has done with what he's done with the invasion at our southern border. And I yield back to my congressman.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not compassionate to lure people, lure children into this country away from their parents with some hope down the road maybe they get back together. That's not compassionate when you lure people to their detriment. In fact, if the U.S. government were susceptible to being sued by people that have been lured into the country to their detriment, and by the open border policy end up causing them to be basically totally under control of the drug cartels, then there would be attractive nuisance lawsuits against this president, against our federal government, for not securing our border and drawing people in who are then harmed. There are constantly people being found that are dead, that tried to make it in, and yet the drug cartels being so heartless, they don't care if they die or not. But they do want to continue to add employees or indentured servants all over the country. But it's just rather dramatic how this president, this administration is doing so much to aid and abet the drug cartels in getting their servants all over the country in cities. And of course, yet it is true, we have Americans that are paying for the drugs, paying for sex trafficking, but we should be doing so much more as a federal government to prevent those things from happening. An article here from Politico, of all places, that it's not just Republicans. Everyone's mad at Biden over migration. You've got Daily Mail from October 20th. Facebook admits users can share information on illegal immigration and being smuggled. Arizona Attorney General calls for investigation into tech giant for facilitating human and sex trafficking. So, once again, just like with our elections, you've got the Democrats in positions of power in the government working hand in hand with the tech giants for something that is just terrible for human beings, and that is facilitating human and sex trafficking. I yield to my friend.
You know, this is the greatest country, Congressman Gohmert, in the world, as you know. There's a reason why people from all over the world want to come to the United States. Never in the history of the world has a nation been more welcoming to immigrants, to people from all corners of the globe who are seeking a better life, seeking freedom. No nation in the history of the world has given more opportunity to people from all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all nationalities, who come here legally, seeking to join us, to strengthen us as a nation, to make us a stronger nation, a more perfect union. People from all religions, all faiths, all races, all ethnicities, seeking desperately to come to the United States of America. A country that is under assault for who it is as a nation by those on the left, by those on the other side of the aisle, who condemn this country and want to change and transform this country into that from which these people are fleeing. You know, I had a reporter say to me once, well, there's not an easy fix here to the immigration situation. And I said, well, it may not be easy, but it is simple. All we've got to do is go back to the policies that were working a year ago that had largely defeated illegal immigration at our southern border. We know that walls work. I've been to the border, had the privilege of going to the border 3 times, twice to Arizona and once to Texas in my first nearly 10 months here serving in this Congress. Something that apparently our president has never done, and our vice president has certainly never done during her time as the quote-unquote border czar. But as I went and saw firsthand for the first time in my life, I'd driven past the border previously just from a car, and I could see, you know, the meager fence that was there before the previous president. But I'd never actually gotten out and visited and walked and talked with the people who live there. The people who are subjected to this illegal invasion, these folks, some of which are very dangerous, but all of which are coming very desperately for different reasons. Coming on their property, vandalizing, invading, threatening, in some cases harming. I met with a rancher family who had a family member killed by an illegal alien. But meeting with ranchers, law enforcement officials, Border Patrol, those on the front lines living with and then also working best they can under this administration, frankly, against this administration, to try to do what they can to deal with the border crisis. And walls do work. The enforcement that we had in place a year ago was working, ending catch and release, establishing MPP, the Remain in Mexico policy, turning folks away through Title 42 policies. We were on the way to fixing our illegal immigration situation. But this administration, with complicit help and support from this majority, of this Democrat majority in this Congress, is not just neglecting our southern border, not just failing to fix our broken illegal immigration situation, but they are part and parcel, complicit and intentional in facilitating this invasion, and as you know all too well, as you've already touched on, hiding it from the American people as they do it. And I yield back to you, Mr. Gomer.
Well, and as my friends noted, there are so many crises that are going on right now. We have the economy being harmed even more by policies of this administration. With the president and all of those working with him and for him demanding that everyone be vaccinated, and the president himself has said, we need to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated, and he's saying the way to do that is make sure all the unvaccinated are vaccinated. So this administration's solution is we got to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated by making the unvaccinated get the vaccination that does not protect you from the unvaccinated. It makes no sense. And as some doctors have said, you know, if somebody put out a vaccine that killed 200 people, they would immediately slam the brakes and say, whoa, 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 wait, let's hold up. We got to find out what the problem is here. But we know from reports that have been made that there are people that have died from having the vaccination. We're thrilled that the vaccines were produced so quickly. President Trump got a lot of the red tape out of the way. However, it ought to be a choice after talking between a doctor and a patient, and the doctor understanding the risks inherent because of the biological makeup of this person for taking the vaccination, and then let the individual decide. But if the vaccination works as good as we were told originally it did, then there should be no vaccinated person really concerned about those that are unvaccinated because they would be protected. I'm glad that the administration is starting to have cracks in their adamant position that having had COVID and having antibodies is just not nearly as good as having a vaccination. I'm glad they're starting to, some of them at least, observe the science that, gee, it's probably a little better if you've had COVID, had the antibodies, as far as your future and fighting it off. So I'm encouraged by that. But then I see this article from October 19th. As we know, we talked about before, the president, I believe he's doing something illegal in saying you've got to have the vaccination. And then he comes out and says, we're going to have OSHA put together a rule requiring everybody to have the vaccination. But the president himself does not sign an executive order which could be taken to court. It's just the general policy of blackmailing companies, private firms, that we're coming after you if you don't force your employees to have the vaccination. It's really a bit insidious the way it doesn't even give people a chance to file suit. You just state a policy you're going to follow and then have everybody follow it. Well, it makes it much more difficult to sue. But this article says OSHA will not enforce 29 CFR 1904's recording requirements to require any employers to record worker side effects from COVID-19 vaccination. The Biden administration is forcing you to take the jab in order to work, and simultaneously, the Biden administration does not want the employer to tell them about workers who were injured by the jab. Simply more evidence the vaccine mandate is not about your health. So that's a little disturbing. You would think if anyone cared about science and really cared about people, you would want to know about every abnormality, every adverse consequence of taking the vaccination, because we're really concerned about individual health. But that's not this administration. They're putting out there, we don't want to know things that are bad. And I was informed about a person that had the vaccination and immediately died after the vaccination and was full of blood clots, not one, but many. And the physician noted the cause of death was blood clots from a vaccination. And then the family was told the health official will not certify a death certificate if it blames the vaccination for the death. So the widow is in a real bind because you've got to have a death certificate in order to legally move forward and get things changed after the person died. You've got to show proof. And yet health officer refusing to attribute the cause of death to what it really was, according to the doctor, the vaccination. So that's pretty remarkable that the government does not want to do its job in protecting people. I would think that if someone in government really cared about people instead of caring about being a dictator, they would say, we want to know exactly what happened after a vaccination that went wrong and which vaccine was it, so we can document which ones are safer than other vaccinations. But that's not apparently what's going on in this country right now. So we really need people stepping up and letting this administration know, letting their members of Congress, their senators know that they expect them to speak up. We want complete transparency. What works, what doesn't work. We don't want the government hiding things from us anymore. Yield to my friend.
And once again, just say how privileged we are to be among the some 5% of the world's population that gets to live here in spite of all the things that we're battling through and we're struggling through as a nation, the crises we're facing, the tyranny of this current regime that's leading us. And our first president, who I believe was our greatest president, I believe divinely inspired, appointed by God to be that first president for the United States, who would not be king, refused to be king. And instead we find ourselves today with one who seemingly would be king if he could, or thinks that he is king, it seems, by actions. In a free country, which we still are to some degree, it is not the government's role to protect us from ourselves. We choose in a free society to endure or be exposed to some risks for our precious freedoms. We're a nation of the people, by the people, for the people, a nation whose founding documents proclaim our God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit, not the government provided, but the pursuit of happiness. And here we find ourselves today, something we could almost not have imagined even a year or two ago, where our most precious, most basic of freedoms have been under threat, under assault, or worse, stripping away from us in the name of a pandemic, in the name of an emergency. The American people should make no mistake that COVID policy needs to be viewed through a long-term lens. There is no such thing as a one-time exception. What we will endure or accept or submit to today becomes the pattern, the model for the future. And again, our most basic freedoms we've seen, our freedom of movement, where we can go, our freedom of assembly, who we can be with, our freedom to work and to provide for ourselves and our family, to open our business, to frequent a business, to worship. And then the most basic of freedoms of all, our freedom of our person. That we now have a president, again, who a year ago, because he would not have gotten elected otherwise, said he would not enforce a vaccine mandate, later said he did not have the authority to enforce a vaccine mandate, and you know better than I, constitutionally has no authority to force this vaccine mandate. Setting aside whether or not it's helpful or justified medically, just speaking legally and constitutionally, the federal government has no authority to do this. Certainly the executive does not have the authority to act like a king and do this. And certainly he does not have the authority to compel businesses to do that which he does not have the authority to do. And yet we see a total disregard. This was a president who ran, as the uniter-in-chief, and instead he's the divider-in-chief, separating and dividing people based on vaccine status, demanding that people disclose their most basic of personal information, whether or not they have received a vaccine, and then under threat of penalty of their job and worse, not to be able to, again, go where they want to go or do what they want to do if they don't comply with the heavy hand of the federal government. And in this terrible, terrible spending package, which is not just the trillions of dollars, but it's what's in it, one of many, many terrible things in it that the American people need to know about is making the penalty for a business that doesn't comply with this vaccine mandate up to $700,000 per occurrence. And to your point, what a shame, what a travesty that our own government is lying to us about COVID and about the vaccine. Here, we know that medicine and science is supposed to be challenged. It's supposed to be debated. It's supposed to be learned from. We don't want the same medicine from yesteryear. We want the very best from today. That we don't just hold on to what was before. We get a medical diagnosis that's troubling. We get a second opinion. We consult with more than one person. We learn. We establish the evidence. But as you know, this government, this federal government, this executive administration, where they're complicit allies in the media and in big tech, shuts down any dissent, to your point, on the stated narrative, the approved narrative, no matter how many times over the doctor-in-chief, the celebrity doctor-in-chief is proved wrong or contradictory, whether it's like on gain of function or whatever it might be. Any dissent is shut down on the risks of the vaccine. And there are risks. And some people understandably make the decision that for them, because of their health, because of their youth, because of their exposure, or because they have natural immunity because they've already had COVID, or their religious reasons or whatever it might be, they decide they don't want to have the vaccine. And this government and their complicit allies that we've already mentioned are lying to us that there are risks to the vaccine. They obviously have been lying to us about the efficacy of the vaccine because, as you made the great point, we're going to force the unvaccinated to get the vaccine that doesn't protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated. They're lying to us about the efficacy of masks. As you know, what we're forced to wear in this chamber when we're not speaking at the lectern, pretending that a cloth mask makes a difference, and there's medical documentation for that, which there's very little conclusive evidence to that effect, as you know. Yes, sir.
Read results of one study that indicated that if you wear a mask, you are 0.2 of 1% less likely to get COVID. So there is that. There's at least 0.2 of 1% that it's apparently helpful, but we don't know the results of long-term wearing a mask, the additional CO2 that may be taken in, or germs that are kept in a mask that would have not been breathed in repeatedly. We don't know the results of all of that, but that's fine, but that's still very different from forcing someone to have an injection, which we know can have very adverse effects. And that's why it ought to be an individual decision to make. But these, then again, also contribute to a crisis in enough people doing jobs that allow us to have a supply chain that is intact and getting people the things they need. Little did I know, you may have anticipated, but there were people making jokes after the vice president had said several weeks ago that, it may have been in August, that people needed to get their orders in now so they would get things by Christmas. Wow. Apparently they saw this coming. But to your point, to the point that's been made by my friend about the various opinions from the same people, when it comes to Dr. Fauci, when it comes to the president, it's hard to find an issue that they haven't been on more than one side of. Fauci would say, no, don't use a mask. Yes, you should use a mask. And then he said use a mask, and then he's seen at a baseball game not wearing a mask, not socially distancing, but then he's given different opinions, and it reminded me of Winston Churchill's comment about Keynes, the economist. Of course, a lot of people say that's Keynesian economics, but if you look back and do some research on the guy, he often, when he got in debate and was confronted that some theory he had wasn't true, didn't work, he would immediately take the other position and say he was not for that, he was for this. And so Winston Churchill had once said, and I believe this is close to verbatim, he said, if you put two economists in a room, you would have three different opinions unless one of them was Sir Keynes, in which case you would have an unlimited number of opinions. And I'm getting that impression from Dr. Fauci, but apparently even Dr. Fauci needs to come to grips with the fact that when he says the U.S. never funded any gain of function research, that, okay, the evidence is there, had us going for a while, but the evidence is in, and that is absolutely not true. So hopefully, in all the myriad of opinions he has, he'll come around and find the truthful opinion when it comes to his group contributing to gain-of-function research that help weaponize the COVID virus. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This administration, this executive branch of the government, as you said, is weaponizing its agencies, its departments, its resources against the American people. On the COVID vaccine mandate that you were mentioning, what greater weapon can we use than to strip folks of their ability to earn a living? But it's part and parcel with this government, this administration, this presidential regime, who believes that the greatest threat to America is Americans, conservatives, patriots, those who vote the wrong way as they see it, those who might have supported the previous president, those who show up to school board meetings, those who don't get a vaccine that they say you have to receive. They're weaponizing the IRS. You know, here in this budget again that they want to approve, the trillions of dollars, they want to hire some 85,000 more IRS agents so they can be more effective in their assault on the American people. Here, we're turning the federal government against parents who show up at school board meetings to express their concern for their children or what's being taught in their schools, which they have to pay for, by the way, they have to fund. And you see that this administration looks with contempt upon the American people, with contempt upon our law enforcement and first responders, with contempt upon our military, has told our military the greatest threat to the country, in addition to climate, is white supremacy in the military, is racism in the military. And we see the CRT forced upon our military while we've got the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying he wants to understand what white rage is. I would like for him to understand what China's doing, what's going on in Afghanistan, what's up with North Korea, what's up with Iran, what's up with Afghanistan. But instead, they're focused on weaponizing the federal government and all of its resources against our very citizens.
Have the Attorney General of the United States jump into issue of disagreements at school board meetings is absolutely astounding. we have record crime, especially in cities controlled totally by Democrats. The crime is going up tremendously. And yet, and I know that Merrick Garland knows the Constitution, at least he has at one time, and he knows that there is no mention in the Constitution of a federal role in education, and yet he sends out a memo saying, basically, it's pretty intimidating, that we're going to start digging into these school board meetings and weaponizing, using the Justice Department to go after people who have differences of agreement, that happen to agree with Dr. King that people should be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. So who would have believed that 40, 50 years after it seemed we were so close to Dr. King's dream being realized, that you would have an administration totally committed to undoing Dr. King's dream and going back to judging people by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. It's just shocking. But then, and of course, the saying in Washington is, and has been for many years, no matter how cynical you are, it's never enough to catch up. Well, then we find out after Attorney General Garland sends out the letter that he's going to go after these people that are in disagreement, that lo and behold, turns out his son-in-law and daughter make a tremendous amount of money selling things in support of critical race theory, judging people by the color of their skin and not by the content of their character. And I noticed, let's see, it's Panorama Education, was co-founded by Zan Tanner. They sell surveys to school districts, according to this article from Callie Pattison. And that has a nationwide focus on, quote, social and emotion climate, which is interesting. I guess they're wanting that climate changed as well. But contracts in more than 50 of the 100 largest school districts in the U.S., Panorama Education claims to be supporting, quote, 13 million students in 23,000 schools and 1,500 districts across 50 states. Panorama Education co-founder Zan Tanner is Attorney General Merrick Garland's son-in-law. And then it goes on to talk about the 21 different states where they're spreading this stuff. The surveys reportedly give justification for new curricula in schools, which parents have recently taken issue with, such as critical race theory. But since 2017, the company has raised $76 million from investors, and just last month, Panorama Education struck a $60 million private financing raise with General Atlantic. So rather amazing, just when you think you can't get more cynical about what this administration's doing, we find out, gee, there is pecuniary gain afoot here on this issue of the Attorney General weighing into school board meetings. Of course, that's kind of flying in the face of the idea that white supremacy and climate change are the two biggest dangers to America, it's just, for those of us that had incredibly good constitutional law professors, we know those professors would say, where is the federal nexus? There has to be some federal reason, something that gives the federal government the right to come in and control school board meetings. Of course, shortly after I got here, I had a law that I was working on. Having family involved in schools, my mother was a school teacher, and I know back then the administrators had the teachers' backs. But now, because of so many lawsuits so easily, quickly filed, administrators would say things to teachers like, look, I realize this student is a total disruption to your class, but his mother or father or both will file lawsuits, and we don't need a lawsuit, so just do the best you can. And that would disrupt the education of other students. So my thought was, well, as a judge, I had what was called judicial immunity. You may not like my rulings, but you can't just sue because you don't like the rulings. There was judicial immunity. And I thought, what if we created an educational immunity? You may not like what a school does or a teacher does, a principal, but unless they have committed a crime, you can't sue them. And that would allow things to get to the place where they used to be when I was growing up. If you had a problem with a teacher or some issue in the school, then you went to the school board meetings, like the Attorney General's trying to stop now. And if somebody on the school board or too many on the school board didn't see it as a problem, then you ran for the school board, got elected, and fixed it. But because of lawsuits, that's totally changed the way schools have had to approach things. So what if we gave them educational immunity? And I'd ask for representatives from the National Education folks, and they came, and I made the presentation, and I was totally shocked when they said, we're not sure that we could support that. I'm going, but it would keep your teachers from being sued at the drop of the hat. You know, people could go to complain to the school board, but you couldn't just go after a teacher. Well, it turns out they eventually got back to me and said, yeah, they wouldn't be able to support that bill. And I was just mortified, mystified too. Why would they not be behind that? And then one of my friends that spent his life in education said, Louis, do you not understand the biggest cash cow, the biggest money maker for the teachers' unions is liability insurance. If you take away their liability, then the teachers' unions can't sell and make money off of liability insurance. There goes that big cash cow. Yes, it would make life easier for teachers, but the unions, the people that are making money from unionizing teachers, they will not ever support something like that. So just, again, going back to the old adage, no matter how cynical you get around here, it's not enough to catch up. Constantly being re-educated on that issue. Yield, my friend.
Well, I thank you, Congressman Gohmert, for allowing me to participate with you. And just the final thing that I'll add, you know, we certainly have agreement and recognition, as I think most Americans do, that we have surrendered control from K to 12 through college of our education system to the hard radical left. And it's refreshing to see parents engaged, Parents standing up and saying this is not what they're paying for. This is not what they're going to stand for. That's the silver lining in the pandemic as more parents became aware of it. And I'll make one more reference in my final words here to the spending package that's being debated by the majority if they're trying to come to agreement to bring to the floor for a vote. It would take it a step further, as you know, and it would take it to free, not only free community college, which is a step towards free college, and probably eliminating faith-based institutions that wouldn't be eligible for the free college, by the way. The marketplace would probably eliminate them as families chose the free public education. But take the preschool and the child care that's